Imagine silence. Digital. Absolute. The kind of silence that rings out when the planet's very own nervous system is severed. On March 2nd, 2024, at approximately 03:15 Coordinated Universal Time, that silence fell. For most of us, it manifested in small ways. A video call with family overseas suddenly froze into a mosaic of pixels, then dropped with a short, impersonal network error. A social media feed stopped refreshing, stuck on yesterday's news. An attempt to send a work email with a large attachment ended with the infinite spin of a loading icon. For an individual, it's a minor annoyance. But when millions, tens of millions of these annoyances happen simultaneously across all of Eurasia, it's no longer a glitch. It's a symptom. The symptom of a digital stroke. In network operation centers in Frankfurt, London, and Dubai, screens that usually shimmered with the green and blue lines of stable connections suddenly blazed an alarming red. Engineers watched a cascading failure spread across global network maps like a crack in a frozen lake. Data packets, flying at the speed of light from Mumbai to Marseille, from Singapore to Rome, simply vanished. They didn't arrive. They didn't return an error report. They fell into a deafening, bottomless void. Within minutes, traffic between Europe and Asia had dropped by 25%. This wasn't a slowdown. This was an amputation. And the epicenter of this amputation was crystal clear. The narrow choke point of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. A blood-red stain on every network activity map. There, on the floor of the Red Sea, something had happened. Something had cut the arteries of the 21st century. The official version of events, which emerged within the next 24 hours, was elegant in its simplicity and chillingly predictable. It fit perfectly into a news cycle already saturated with geopolitical tension. Global media outlets, citing anonymous intelligence sources and statements from telecom giants, pointed to the culprit: Yemeni Houthi rebels. According to this narrative, during their attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea, they had either deliberately damaged the undersea cables, or one of the attacked ships, in a desperate attempt to save itself, had dropped anchor and snagged the vital lines. The story was flawless. It had a clear villain, whose actions were already being condemned on the international stage. It had a clear motive, the destabilization of global trade and communication. And most importantly, it had a simple, mechanical explanation: an anchor, a cutter, an act of sabotage. This was a trickster event in its purest form, loud, dramatic, capturing the world's attention, and crucially, offering up a simple, terrestrial, and easily identifiable enemy. Problem solved. No mystery. Just a crime, a criminal, and a repair crew already en route to the site of the break. News broadcasts filled with animated maps of the Red Sea, dotted lines marking the damaged conduits. AAE-1, CECOM, EIG. Pundits in expensive suits discussed the consequences for the global economy, the need to protect critical infrastructure, the new front in hybrid warfare. The world sighed, found someone to blame, and moved on to debating the details. But while the news helicopters were circling political capitals and not the Red Sea, while the experts argued over insurance payouts, something else was happening. Something far larger and incomparably stranger. And to see it, you had to look up. Way up. To a place where there is no politics, no anchors, no headlines. To the cold, silent void of space. Because in the very same 48 hours that the world was debating sabotage in the Red Sea, a visitor was passing through our solar system, uninvited, unpredictable, and utterly anomalous. Its official designation is 3I Atlas, the third confirmed interstellar object in the history of astronomical observation. It was first detected by the Atlas Survey, an automated sky scanning system, several months before these events. At first, it seemed like just another comet, arriving from the depths of space. But the longer they watched it, the more questions it raised. First, its trajectory. It wasn't just hyperbolic, it was defiant. The object was moving with such an excess of velocity that its journey from another star system was beyond doubt. It was not a prisoner of our sun. It was a transient passenger. Second, its behavior. It had virtually no coma, the cloud of gas and dust that forms around comets as they approach the sun and their ices sublimate. 3I Atlas was dark, almost non-reflective, and yet it showed no signs of outgassing. It was solid, cold, inert. Spectral analysis conducted by the world's largest telescopes yielded even stranger results. Its surface was unlike any known asteroid or comet in our system. Its spectrum revealed lines that were difficult to interpret, hinting at an unusual, perhaps even artificially processed, composition of materials. It was a riddle, wrapped in a mystery, hurtling through the vacuum at tens of kilometers per second. Astronomers theorized, published papers, argued at conferences. Was it a fragment of an exoplanet? The core of a dead comet coated in an organic crust? Or something else? And then, in late February and early March of 2024, 3I Atlas made its closest pass. Not to Earth, no. Its trajectory was plotted with cold precision. It was passing over the plane of the ecliptic, executing a gravitational maneuver around the sun that would accelerate it even further and fling it out of our system. But at the very moment the fiber optic strands were snapping on the floor of the Red Sea, 3I Atlas was at a very specific point in its orbit, a point from which it had a direct, unobstructed line of sight to the Arabian Peninsula and Northeast Africa. A point that placed it at the zenith, directly above this narrow corridor of the planet. A coincidence? Just a cosmic accident that happened to overlap with a terrestrial conflict? Or choreography? A choreography played out on a timescale too vast for us to immediately notice. And it is here, at this intersection of two seemingly unrelated events, that our investigation begins. The official timeline states that between February 26th and March 2nd, a series of incidents led to the severing of 4 of the 15 undersea cables in the Red Sea. Network providers like HGC Global Communications published vague reports, citing physical damage and the rerouting of traffic. The militaries of several nations issued statements about a potential threat to navigation and the need for an investigation. It all created the picture of a chaotic but ultimately understandable event. A few isolated points of failure caused by mechanical impact. The problem is, when you start to overlay this timeline onto the ephemeris, the precise orbital data of Object 3I Atlas, the picture stops being chaotic. It becomes terrifyingly precise. The first reports of packet loss on the SEACOM line appeared at the moment 3I Atlas crossed the orbit of Mars, entering a zone where it could no longer be effectively observed by most ground-based telescopes due to its proximity to the sun. It entered a blind spot. The final, most powerful cascade failure, affecting the AAE-1 line, occurred at the calculated hour when the object was at the apex of its trajectory over the African continent, in a perfect position for what? Observation? Or something else? Correlation, as we are constantly reminded, does not imply causation. But when events of this magnitude coincide with a precision of a few hours, ignoring that correlation is no longer scientific caution. It is willful blindness. The system, in the form of telecom corporations and military agencies, offered us a simple enemy with a rifle and a rusty anchor. It was convenient. It distracted from the questions. Questions like, why did none of the numerous hydroacoustic monitoring systems in this strategically vital region release any public recordings of the break? We know what a snapping cable sounds like under pressure. We know what a dragging anchor sounds like on a rocky seabed. Why were we not allowed to hear it? We were told the cables were cut. But in the reports that leaked onto private forums for network engineers, entirely different words appeared. Anomalous temperature readings at the ends of the break, melting inconsistent with the mechanical damage. The glass structure of the fiber optic core turned to dust. This no longer sounds like the work of an anchor. It sounds more like the work of something we can't even begin to imagine. And here is the central question that no one has dared to ask aloud. While everyone was looking down into the murky waters of the Red Sea, searching for saboteurs, did we miss the moment the real strike came from above? From the absolute silent cold of darkness. The official story of anchors and rebels wasn't just an explanation, it was a smokescreen. A perfect smokescreen, hiding something unimaginable. And the numbers we will analyze next do not lie. They scream that the timestamps of these failures were not random. They were calibrated with astronomical precision. This was not a glitch. This was an operation. To break through the architecture of concealment built around the Red Sea incident, one must first give it its due. One must understand how robust, logical, and above all, convenient it was. The official story, the story of anchors and saboteurs, was not just a lie. It was a masterpiece of information engineering, designed to calm, distract, and ultimately make everyone look in the wrong direction. So let's perform a dissection, a kind of informational autopsy, to find the first, barely perceptible crack from which its collapse began. To do this, we must descend to the depths, 2 kilometers, about 1.2 miles, beneath the surface of the Red Sea, into the cold, impenetrable darkness where the nerve fibers of our civilization rest. An undersea fiber optic cable is not just a wire. It is a marvel of engineering, built to survive in one of the most hostile environments on the planet. Imagine it in cross-section. At the very center, the heart of it all, is the reason for its existence. A bundle of optical fibers, each thinner than a human hair. These glass threads, the purest silicon dioxide, are the channels through which our emails, our financial transactions, our voices, and our secrets race at the speed of light. This fragile bundle is protected by multiple layers of armor. First comes a copper or aluminum tube, then a layer of waterproof polycarbonate, then a shock-absorbing gel. All of this is wrapped in several layers of steel wire, braided like a rope, and then covered in a thick, resilient polyethylene sheath. The result is a structure the diameter of a garden hose, but with the strength of a ship's hawser. These cables aren't just dropped onto the seabed. They are laid with extreme care by special cable-laying ships, which use an underwater plow to cut a trench in the seafloor and bury the cable inside it, protecting it from accidental damage. This entire complex and expensive infrastructure is built with a single goal: stability. The engineers who design these systems account for everything: underwater earthquakes, volcanic activity, soil shifts, and of course, the human factor. And the most common form of human factor is precisely what we were offered as an explanation: anchors and fishing trawls. Official scenario number 1, accidental anchor damage. Imagine a giant container ship with a dead weight of 200,000 metric tons coming under attack in the narrow strait. Panic on the bridge. The captain orders an emergency anchor drop to stop the vessel, avoid running aground, or stabilize it. The multi-ton steel behemoth is released from its chain and hurtles toward the bottom. It strikes with immense force, kicking up a cloud of silt. The floor of the Red Sea is not smooth sand. It's a complex terrain of coral reefs, rock outcroppings, and sedimentary deposits. The anchor digs in, and the ship, still drifting with the current and wind, drags it along. This multi-ton plow carves up the seabed, destroying everything in its path. And if one of the fiber optic cables lies in its way, the result is predictable. The steel flukes of the anchor snag the cable. The tension builds to a critical point. The steel armor, designed to withstand immense pressure, cannot handle such a dynamic load. It snaps with a deep, low-frequency boom that travels for miles through the water. The polyethylene sheath ruptures. The internal layers of protection are shredded. And finally, the fragile glass fibers at the core break, severing the flow of light. The signal dies. Digital silence falls. This is a brutal, messy, chaotic process. It leaves behind a characteristic set of clues. A deep furrow on the seafloor, torn and frayed ends of the cable, and debris from the protective layers scattered around. It looks like the work of a dull, crude axe. Official scenario number 2, deliberate sabotage. This version implies a higher level of planning and intent. They are not acting blindly. A sabotage team, using precise maps of the cable routes, which, by the way, are not secret, finds the target section. Either a team of combat divers or more likely an unmanned underwater vehicle equipped with manipulator arms is deployed. Attached to its hands are special cutting tools, hydraulic shears or circular saws. The vehicle finds the cable, grabs it, and methodically cuts it. This process leaves completely different traces. The cut would be relatively clean, neat. There might be marks on the seafloor from the vehicle's landing struts. This is no longer an axe. This is the work of a saw or a giant pair of cutters. Both of these scenarios, though different in their details, share one fundamental characteristic. They are both mechanical impacts. They involve physical contact, tearing, friction, pressure. They leave behind a predictable set of evidence. And that is precisely why this version was so readily accepted. It was familiar. It was understandable. It fit within our world of physical objects and terrestrial conflicts. But it is here, in this seeming simplicity, that the first crack was hidden. And to see it, you didn't need to be a military analyst or a telecom engineer. You just needed to ask one simple question. What do the cables themselves say? What did that informational autopsy at the ends of the break reveal? And this is where things get strange. The first hints appeared not in official press releases, but in semi-private technical chats and forums where engineers who work on cable laying and repair ships communicate. These are people who have seen dozens, if not hundreds of breaks. They know the handwriting of an anchor, the signature of a fishing trawl, and the marks of shark teeth on polyethylene. And what they began to whisper about did not align with the official picture at all. Leaked fragments of preliminary reports, exchanged between telecom operators, contained words that should not have been there. The first word was melting. A mechanical break doesn't melt steel armor and polyethylene. It tears and grinds them. Melting requires extremely high temperatures, applied in a very short period of time. The second word was vitrification. It referred to the optical fibers themselves. At the ends of the break, where there should have been a clean fracture or glass shards, a structure resembling a solidified droplet was observed. The quartz glass of the fibers had turned into an amorphous mass, as if it had been momentarily heated to its melting point of over 1,500 degrees Celsius, about 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit, and then instantly cooled by the pressure of the surrounding water. No anchor, no cutter is capable of this. It is physically impossible. This looked less like a break and more like vaporization, as if, at the point of impact, the cable had simply ceased to exist for a fraction of a second, and the surrounding materials had melted from a monstrous release of energy. This was not the work of an axe or a saw. This was the work of an invisible, high-precision energy scalpel. This anomaly in the physical damage was the first crack, but the second was even deeper and far more deafening. And it wasn't about sound, but its complete absence. Our planet, especially its oceans, is not a quiet place. Sound travels much farther and more efficiently in water than in air, and we have learned to listen. Ever since the Cold War, the floor of the world's oceans has been dotted with a network of highly sensitive hydrophones. The SOSA system, once owned by the US Navy, was designed to track Soviet submarines. Today, its descendants are global monitoring systems used by both militaries and scientists for a wide range of purposes, from seismic activity and studying whale migrations to monitoring compliance with nuclear test ban treaties. These ears of the planet hear everything. They can distinguish the propeller noise of a specific submarine thousands of miles away. They record underwater volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. And they most certainly should have recorded the sound of 4 massive undersea cables snapping. As we've discussed, a cable breaking under tension is a powerful acoustic event, a low-frequency thump or bang. The scraping of a multi-ton anchor dragging across a rocky bottom is an even louder and more prolonged sound, a true underwater screech that is impossible to mistake. And here is the key question. Where are these recordings? The Red Sea is one of the most militarized and closely monitored waterways on the planet. It has more hydrophones than almost anywhere else. Why has not a single one of the dozens of agencies monitoring this region published acoustic data confirming the anchor or sabotage theory? Releasing such a recording would have instantly answered all questions. It would have been the most compelling piece of evidence, but instead, silence. Complete, absolute, deafening silence. The absence of evidence, when it is supposed to be there, is in itself the strongest evidence. This silence was not accidental. It was artificial. It was a choice. They were hiding the data not because there was nothing there. They were hiding it because there was something there that completely destroyed the official version. Something they couldn't or wouldn't explain. The problem wasn't that their model was wrong. The problem was that they ignored the data that contradicted it. And that is no longer a mistake. That is a cover-up. And this is where our first oracle enters the scene. Not a major government agency, but a small, independent European oceanographic station. Let's call it Project Triton. It's a consortium of several universities studying climate change and water salinity. They have several autonomous research buoys scattered across the world's oceans, including one that, by sheer chance, was drifting near the entrance to the Gulf of Aden, on the edge of the incident zone. This buoy was not part of any military or intelligence network. Its job was to collect boring scientific data, temperature, chemical composition, current speeds. And, among other things, it was equipped with a broadband hydrophone to study the acoustic landscape and whale songs. The data from this buoy was not classified. It was just sitting on a public server at a European university, waiting for some graduate student to analyze it for their dissertation. And we found it. We started combing through the raw acoustic recordings for the period from February 26th to March 2nd. We were looking for the low-frequency boom of tearing metal. We were looking for the screech of an anchor. We found neither. But we did find something else. 4 times. 4 times during this period, an anomalous signal appeared in the recordings. It was incredibly short, just a few tens of milliseconds, and it was incredibly strange. It was not an explosion. It was not an impact. It was a chirp, a high-frequency, ascending chirp, almost at the edge of human hearing. Perfectly clean, with no harmonics or distortion. It sounded more like a sound generated by a synthesizer than anything that could be born in the depths of the ocean. It didn't sound like a whale call, or a submarine sonar, or drilling equipment. Nothing. When we overlaid the timestamps of these 4 anomalous chirps onto the timeline of the internet cable failures, a chill ran down our spines. The correlation was perfect. Each chirp was recorded a fraction of a second before another cable went silent. The first chirp, and 200 milliseconds later, the CCOM line goes down. The second chirp, EIG, goes silent. The third and fourth, separated by a few hours, AAE-1 and TGN Gulf Fall. This was not the sound of the aftermath of the break. This was the sound of the event that caused the break. It was the sonic signature of a weapon. But the strangest part was something else. Analyzing the signal from a single buoy didn't allow for precise triangulation of the source, but it did allow for a preliminary conclusion about its direction, and that conclusion was impossible. The signal didn't come from the side, not from the direction of the shipping lanes. Based on how it was registered by the hydrophone, the sound wave arrived almost vertically, from above, as if something had struck the surface of the water directly above the cable. But no satellite at that time had detected any explosion or flash on the ocean surface. It was a sound without a visible source. And that's when we understood. We were looking at the wrong medium. We were trying to find an explanation in the acoustics of water. But what if the sound was just a side effect? What if the primary energy was delivered not through a sound wave? What if this chirp was just the faint echo, the shriek that the water itself made as something else passed through it? Something incredibly powerful, focused, and invisible. The sound didn't come from under the water. The data, these 4 short, impossible signals, pointed to an incredible, absurd conclusion. The source was not in the ocean. It was above it. That anomalous, ascending chirp, caught by a lone hydrophone off the coast of Somalia, was more than just a clue. It was a key, unlocking a door to a whole new dimension of this mystery. It forced us to lift our gaze from the seafloor, from the familiar theories of anchors and saboteurs, and to look up. If the source of the sound was above the water, if it came from an almost vertical direction, it meant one thing. The event that damaged the cables had left its mark not just in the depths, but on the ocean surface as well. And if there was a trace on the surface, however fleeting, it should have been seen. Because in the 21st century, we live under the sleepless, all-seeing gaze of an entire constellation of silent sentinels. Our planet is wrapped in a cocoon of satellites. A second, artificial noosphere, a digital shell that scans, photographs, measures, and analyzes every square centimeter of the Earth's surface every second. We're used to thinking of this in terms of GPS navigation or weather forecasts, but the reality is far more vast. It is a global surveillance system with no parallel in human history. Imagine this invisible fleet, in polar orbits, synchronized with the Earth's rotation, move the remote sensing satellites. Spacecraft from the Landsat and Sentinel series, owned by NASA and the European Space Agency, act like tireless cartographers, charting the sky, creating detailed multispectral maps of land and sea. They see how forests change, how glaciers melt, how phytoplankton blooms in the ocean. Their cameras can resolve objects just a few tens of meters across. Then there are the meteorological satellites in geostationary orbits like the GUES series. They hang over a single point on the equator at an altitude of 36,000 kilometers, about 22,300 miles, like frozen watchmen, continuously monitoring the movement of clouds, the birth of hurricanes, and temperature anomalies. Their gaze isn't as sharp as the low-orbiting craft, but it is constant. They miss nothing. But even this is just the visible civilian part of the iceberg. There are other eyes, those that operate in the invisible parts of the spectrum. Satellites equipped with synthetic aperture radar, or SAR. These are the true magicians. They can see through clouds, through smoke, day and night. They don't take photographs in the conventional sense. They send a radio pulse to the Earth's surface and analyze its reflection, its echo. From the intensity and phase of this echo, they build incredibly detailed relief maps. But even more importantly for our investigation, they can measure the texture of a surface with phenomenal accuracy. To a SAR radar, A calm ocean surface and a surface covered in ripples or waves look completely different. Any disturbance, be it the wake from a ship, an oil slick smoothing the waves, or even a cluster of raindrops hitting the water, leaves a distinct, recognizable signature on a radar image. And then there are the infrared radiometers, capable of measuring surface temperature with an accuracy of fractions of a degree. Any heat release, a forest fire, a volcanic eruption, or a sudden, anomalous heating of a patch of ocean would be immediately detected and mapped. This global sensor network, this web of civilian, scientific, and, of course, classified military satellites, creates what analysts call a digital twin of the planet. Almost no significant physical event on the Earth's surface can occur without leaving a trace in the data streams flowing from orbit. Millions of terabytes of information are sent to processing centers on Earth every day, where algorithms sift through them in search of anomalies. And this brings us to the crucial point. If something, coming from space, struck the surface of the Red Sea with enough energy to damage armored cables at a depth of 2 kilometers, 1.2 miles, then that event simply had to have left a monstrous trace on the surface. It could not have gone unnoticed. Imagine the possible scenarios. If it were a focused beam of microwave radiation, it would have instantly boiled the top layer of water, creating a cloud of steam and a powerful thermal signature that would be visible in the infrared as a bright flash. If it were a kinetic impact, some super dense bullet, it would have caused a huge splash and concentric waves, which are perfectly visible on radar images. If it were some exotic type of energy beam, it could have ionized the water, causing it to glow or leaving a unique spectral signature that hyperspectral cameras would have recorded. There had to be a trace. Absolutely. Missing it would be as impossible as missing a meteorite impact in the center of a major city. It was with this certainty that we began our dive into the public data archives. We entered the digital labyrinth where the system stores its memory of the world. Portals like the Copernicus Open Access Hub of the European Space Agency, or NOAA's Comprehensive Large Array Data Stewardship System, CLASS, are true treasure troves. In theory, anyone can go there, select a region of interest, a time interval, and the type of satellite data, and download the raw files for their own analysis. This is the very managed transparency we spoke of. The system gives you access to an ocean of information, confident that you will simply drown in it, lacking the tools or knowledge to find anything specific. But we knew what to look for. Our targets were the data from 2 key spacecraft. The first was Sentinel-1, a European satellite with a SAR radar, which was scheduled to pass over the incident zone on the night of February 27th to 28th. Its data would be decisive. The second was NOAA-20, an American polar orbiting satellite equipped with a suite of highly sensitive radiometers, including the VI-IRS instrument, which sees in both visible and infrared ranges. Its pass occurred a few hours later, but it still could have caught residual thermal effects. We entered the coordinates, we selected the time frame, we submitted the query, and that's when we encountered a ghost in the machine. On the screen where a list of downloadable files should have appeared, the system returned a short, soulless message. Error 404. Data not found. At first, we thought it was a glitch, a technical error. We checked our parameters, reran the search. The result was the same. Then we widened the time range. Data from February 25th. Available. Data from March 4th. Go ahead. Download. But the entire 48-hour window from February 26th to March 2nd over that specific narrow corridor of the Red Sea was empty. It was as if someone had neatly cut 2 days of the planet's life out of its memory. This wasn't just strange. It was impossible. Satellites don't just stop working. Data streams don't just get interrupted. Even if there's an onboard failure, it's recorded in the logs. If there are problems with a ground receiving station, That's also reflected in the metadata. But here, there were no error messages, no explanations. There was just a void, a digital vacuum, an information black hole that perfectly matched the time and place of our event. It was at this moment that our investigation shifted from analyzing facts to analyzing their absence, because this void was not passive, it was eloquent. It screamed of intent. Let's apply our three-cornered method again. The official point of view, if we could get it, would likely boil down to a technical failure. During the specified period, there were issues with the communication channel at the receiving station in Svalbard, resulting in data packet loss. Or, a recorded M3.7 class solar flare at that time caused temporary glitches in the satellite's electronics, leading to corruption of the data array, which was deemed unsuitable for archiving. It sounds scientific, convincing, but it doesn't stand up to basic scrutiny. Why did a glitch in Svalbard only affect data from a single tiny patch of the planet, while gigabytes of information from adjacent regions were received and archived without issue? Why did a solar flare so selectively damage information for the exact period we're interested in? The statistical probability of such a coincidence approaches zero. It's like a hurricane demolishing a single house in a city without touching any of the neighboring buildings. The alternative view, which we share, is that the data wasn't lost. It was removed. We started digging deeper, studying the information processing protocols at these agencies, and we found something interesting. In modern satellite data analysis systems, neural networks play an increasingly important role. Machine learning algorithms automatically scan incoming images for predefined patterns: oil spills, illegal logging, ballistic missile launches. But these systems have another, unadvertised function. They search for what are classified as UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena. These are events whose signatures do not match any known model, neither natural nor man-made. And here is our speculative hypothesis, our take on what really happened. The moment the energy strike hit the Red Sea, the radar of Sentinel-1 and the radiometer of NOAA-20 recorded it. They recorded a signature that was not in their libraries. Perhaps it was the instantaneous cavitation of a huge volume of water. Perhaps it was an ultra-short gamma-ray burst in the atmosphere. Perhaps it was a pattern of standing waves on the surface that violated the laws of hydrodynamics. Whatever it was, the automated system, the ghost in the machine, couldn't classify it. It raised an alarm. It flagged this piece of data with a red tag marked Unknown High Energy Signature. And at that moment, a protocol was triggered. A protocol that isn't written about in public documents. According to this protocol, such data is immediately removed from the general stream that goes to public archives. It's placed in a digital quarantine on a secure server, accessible only to a very small circle of analysts with the appropriate clearance level. And in the public archive, in its place, a void is formed. That same Error 404. This is not a clumsy cover-up. It is elegant, automated, surgically precise censorship. The system isn't lying to you by saying the data is gone. It's simply not allowing you to see it, because it doesn't understand what's on it. And what it doesn't understand, it defaults to treating as a threat. The silence we encountered was not accidental. It was a response to what the satellites saw during those 2 missing days. And when we started looking for confirmation of this theory on specialized forums where insiders and former space agency employees communicate, we stumbled upon an anonymous post. It was short, just a few lines. Don't look for what's missing. Look for what appeared right before it. Request the magnetometer calibration logs from NOAA-20 for the hour before the incident. They couldn't hide everything. This was the thread leading out of the digital void and back into the real world, and it hinted at something even stranger. What if the thing that struck the sea left a mark not just on the water, but in the very space around the Earth. The anonymous message left on an encrypted image board was like a breadcrumb in a digital desert. Short, emotionless. It was both a taunt and an invitation. Don't look for what's missing. Look for what appeared right before it. It was a brilliant piece of advice in its simplicity. It pointed to a fundamental weakness in any system of concealment. You can delete the primary data set, erase terabytes of satellite images, scrub the logs of network switches. This requires power, resources, coordination. But you can't erase everything. You can't delete the shadows and echoes that any major event leaves behind. There are always byproducts, secondary data that the system considers informational noise, unworthy of attention. Calibration logs, engineering telemetry, diagnostic reports. These are the digital basements, attics, and storage closets of the global information infrastructure, cluttered with trillions of lines of code and numbers that no one ever reads. And that is exactly where our anonymous guide sent us, to the magnetometers of the NOAA-20 satellite. This was not just advice. It was a challenge. And to accept it, we needed someone who could read the language of this digital noise. We needed an oracle. In the world of independent investigations, in that gray zone where science borders on paranoia, people like Stefan Burns are both prophets and outcasts. To official science, to the establishment, Burns is at best an eccentric, at worst, a menace. A former geophysicist who left a prestigious university after a series of conflicts with its administration, he has become the embodiment of everything the academic community fears. A brilliant mind, unshackled by dogma, and, most terrifyingly, accountable only to his audience on the internet. The system sees him as a man who finds patterns in random noise, suffering from apophenia on a planetary scale. For them, his work is not science, but a modern form of divination using the tea leaves of public data. But for his followers, for the thousands of people united in his online community called the Kepler Anomaly Research Group, or KRG, Stefan Burns is something entirely different. He is a digital archaeologist, a man who descends into the abandoned mines of public archives and returns with artifacts that the system either missed or deliberately buried. His weapons are not telescopes or laboratories. His weapons are a cluster of several dozen servers in his basement, running custom-written software, and the collective intelligence of hundreds of enthusiasts from around the world, programmers, retired military analysts, amateur radio operators, engineers. They are not looking for little green men. They are looking for what Burns himself calls informational singularities, points in the data sets where the known laws of physics and statistics begin to break down. It was to him, to this digital oracle, that we came with that breadcrumb, the anonymous tip to check the magnetometer logs. Burns and his team approached the task with their characteristic methodical obsession. First, they immersed us in the context, explaining what a magnetometer on a weather satellite is and why it's so important. Imagine the Earth as a giant dipole magnet. From its molten iron core, lines of force emanate, wrapping the planet in an invisible cocoon, the magnetosphere. This cocoon is our primary shield. It protects all life from the continuous bombardment of charged particles flying from the sun, the so-called solar wind. The magnetometer on NOAA-20, orbiting at an altitude of 824 kilometers, about 512 miles, continuously measures the strength of this field. Its main job is to monitor space weather. When a solar flare occurs and a cloud of plasma hurtles towards Earth, the magnetosphere compresses like a drum, and the magnetometers detect this, warning of an impending geomagnetic storm that could disable satellites and power grids. But the magnetometer has an enemy, the satellite itself. The onboard electronics, the solar panels, the orientation thrusters, all create their own local magnetic fields that contaminate the measurements. This is noise, To get clean data about the Earth's magnetic field, the instrument must be periodically calibrated. This internal noise is measured and subtracted from the total signal. This calibration data is generally considered service information. It has no scientific value, and that, as our anonymous source suggested, is why it might have been missed or not deemed necessary to hide. The KRG team downloaded the full engineering telemetry package from the NOAA-20 magnetometer for the 48 hours surrounding the Red Sea incident. It was raw, unprocessed numbers. At first glance, chaos. A symphony of noise in which it was impossible to discern anything. But then, what Burns calls digital exorcism began. They created a precise mathematical model of the satellite's own magnetic field, considering the position of its solar panels, the operation of every onboard instrument, its orientation relative to the Sun and Earth. Using a custom-written script, they began to peel back these layers of noise from the source signal. First, they subtracted the satellite's main field. Then, the fluctuations caused by the thrusters. Then, the interference from the radio transmitter. The signal became cleaner and cleaner. They filtered out the predictable oscillations of the Earth's magnetic field due to its rotation. They removed the gentle waves caused by changes in the solar wind, cross-referencing with data from other space observatories monitoring the Sun. Incidentally, no significant flares were recorded during that period, which already struck a blow against one of the possible official explanations. And when they finished, when all the known and predictable noise had been cast out from thousands of lines of chaotic numbers, something remained on the screen. A single, perfectly defined anomaly. It was not a smooth surge, characteristic of a geomagnetic storm. It was a sharp, almost vertical spike. A solitary pulse that appeared from nowhere and vanished into nothing. Its duration was incredibly short, only about 150 milliseconds. But its amplitude was monstrous. The magnetic field strength at the satellite's location momentarily jumped by several tens of nanoteslas. That's not much in absolute terms, but in the context of calm space weather, it was like hearing a cannon fire in a soundproof room. Burns and his team called this event the Red Signature, and the timestamp of this pulse made them fall silent. It was recorded exactly 11 seconds before the first registered outage of the CCOM cable. But even that wasn't the main discovery. The most important question remained unanswered. Where did this pulse come from? Was it generated by some unknown phenomenon in the upper layers of the Earth's atmosphere? Or was its source in space? This is where Burns played his trump card: collective intelligence. He realized that one satellite was not enough. He needed triangulation. He needed other magnetometers in other points of near-Earth space. He turned to the data from the European Space Agency, specifically the SWARM mission. This is not a single satellite, but a constellation of 3 spacecraft flying at different altitudes, specifically designed to create the most accurate map of the Earth's magnetic field to date. Their data is also publicly available. It took several hours to download and synchronize the datasets from the 3 SWARM satellites and the one NOAA-20. 4 independent observers. 4 points of view. The software began its calculations trying to determine the vector from which the magnetic disturbance arrived. If the source were on Earth or in the ionosphere, all 4 satellites would have registered a pulse coming from below. If it were solar activity, the disturbance front would have been flat and would have hit them all simultaneously from the direction of the Sun. The results that appeared on the screen half an hour later destroyed both of these versions. The triangulation gave an unequivocal answer. The source of the pulse was not on Earth, and not on the Sun. It was localized to a specific point in space at an altitude of approximately 70,000 kilometers, about 43,500 miles, above the planet's surface. It was far beyond the orbits of all 4 satellites. It came from above. And when Burns entered the coordinates of this source into his program, and then overlaid them with the ephemeris of the interstellar object 3I Atlas for that exact moment in time, silence fell. The points matched, within the margin of error for the calculations. The source of the magnetic pulse was exactly where 3I Atlas was supposed to be at that very second. This was the smoking gun, the physical evidence that perfectly filled the data gap left by the system. While they were erasing radar and infrared images, while they remained silent about the acoustic signals, they had missed this. They hadn't thought that someone would be digging through junk calibration logs, and those logs told us everything. That red signature wasn't the weapon itself. It was most likely a side effect. Imagine a giant capacitor building up energy for a shot. The moment it discharges, some of that energy is inevitably dissipated into the surrounding space as a powerful electromagnetic pulse. What the satellites detected was the exhaust, the muzzle flash of an invisible energy weapon that momentarily distorted the planet's own magnetic field. This wasn't just a pulse. It was a signature. A high-tech, energetic signature. And it perfectly explained everything else. The melted ends of the cables, and the strange high-frequency chirp, which was likely the sound of water cavitating under the beam's impact. But Burns didn't stop there. If such a signature exists, if this is the characteristic handwriting of a certain technology, then perhaps this wasn't the first time. Emboldened by their discovery, the members of CARG began a real hunt through the archives. They started looking for other cases of unexplained technological failures over the past decade. Sudden satellite shutdowns, cascading power grid failures, strange radio interference that coincided in time with the passage of other anomalous objects near Earth. They looked at the data from 2017, when the first interstellar visitor, Oumuamua, passed through the solar system. And they found it. They found another, much weaker magnetic spike, barely distinguishable from the noise, which coincided with the moment of Oumuamua's closest approach to Earth. And this spike, in turn, perfectly matched the time of an unexplained and still unsolved temporary malfunction of several GPS satellites over the Pacific Ocean. The picture began to take on a frightening shape. The triangle, once filmed by an amateur astronomer, was not just an anomaly. The magnetic signature, recorded over the Red Sea, was not just an event. It was a signature. A technological signature. And it was repeating. This was not first contact. This was an ongoing series of visits. Quiet, unnoticed, surgically precise. And each time, they left their invisible calling card, burned into the magnetic field of our planet. The discovery made by Stefan Burns and his team was like an explosion in the silence. It transformed the scattered pieces of the puzzle, the cable break, the missing satellite data, the anomalous acoustic signal, into a single, terrifyingly coherent picture. We no longer had just a set of strange coincidences. We had a piece of physical evidence, the red signature, that directly linked the incident in the Red Sea to the interstellar object 3 Atlas. It was a breakthrough. But a breakthrough is not the end of an investigation. It is merely the beginning of a new, far more complex phase. We now had to move from the question of what happened to the questions of how, and most importantly, why. We had to become cartographers. We had to map out what, until this moment, had been only a vague suspicion. We needed to construct the map of a conspiracy, or, to use a more precise and less emotionally charged metaphor, we needed to reconstruct the architecture of this event, to understand its design, to see the cold, ruthless choreography in what appeared to be chaos. To do this, we had to stop looking at the Red Sea incident as an isolated event. We had to place it in context. We had to expand our temporal and spatial horizons and start connecting dots that no one had ever tried to connect before. We had to begin building our information cascade, First, we went back to the very beginning, to the moment 3I Atlas was discovered. The Atlas Automated Sky Survey, located in Hawaii, first recorded it as a faint dim point in images taken in late 2023. Astronomers around the world aimed their telescopes at the indicated point. The standard process began: data collection, orbit calculation, characterization. And even at this earliest stage, oddities began to appear. The orbit, as we've said, was clearly hyperbolic, with an eccentricity significantly greater than 1, which irrefutably pointed to its interstellar origin. But when astronomers tried to rewind its trajectory to determine which star system it came from, they ran into a problem. Its path did not point to any of our nearest stars. It came from a patch of sky that appeared empty, from a dark, unremarkable space between the constellations of Lyra and Hercules. This in itself was not extraordinary, but what was strange was its velocity relative to the Sun, even after accounting for deceleration upon entering the system, was unusually low for an interstellar object. It was moving as if it weren't just passing by, but approaching our system with purpose. This gave rise to the first bold hypotheses. Avi Loeb, the Harvard astrophysicist known for his unorthodox views, suggested that 3I Atlas, like Oumuamua before it, might not be a natural object, but a technological artifact, a probe sent by another civilization. But even this bold hypothesis didn't explain everything. And here, we add the first, seemingly unrelated element to our cascade. 3 months before the official discovery of 3I Atlas, in September of 2023, a quiet, almost unnoticed event took place in the world of professional astronomy. The SETI protocol was updated. SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, is the collective name for projects searching for alien life. For decades, they boiled down to one thing: listening. Pointing radio telescopes at stars and listening in the hope of catching an artificial ordered signal. But the new protocol, adopted at a closed conference in Paris, introduced one significant change. A new section appeared, dedicated to so-called passive artifacts. For the first time at an official level, it was acknowledged that first contact might not be a radio signal, but the discovery of a physical object, a probe, or its wreckage. And most importantly, the protocol outlined new rules for responding to such a discovery. It recommended refraining from hasty public announcements, conducting a thorough, multilateral verification, and, crucially, coordinating any publications through a specially created international committee. Officially, this was explained by the need to avoid false alarms and panic. But in essence, it was a protocol for information control. It was a manual for creating an architecture of silence. A coincidence? That 3 months before the discovery of the strangest interstellar object in history, the global scientific community suddenly decided to rewrite the rules of the game, preparing for this exact scenario? Or did they know something in advance? What if the first faint traces of 3I Atlas were spotted a year or 2 years earlier? And all this time, a quiet, invisible preparation for its arrival was underway? Let's add a second stream to our information cascade. Let's return to the moment of the incident itself. Late February, early March, 2024. While the world's attention was fixed on the geopolitical crisis in the Red Sea, in a completely different part of the world, in the silence and cold of Antarctica, something no less strange was happening. The Ice Cube Neutrino Observatory, located deep in the ice at the South Pole, recorded an event. Ice Cube is not a telescope in the conventional sense. It is a giant detector, consisting of thousands of optical sensors frozen into a cubic kilometer of crystal clear ice. Its job is to catch neutrinos, those elusive ghost particles that barely interact with matter and can pass through the entire Earth without leaving a trace. But sometimes, very rarely, an ultra-high energy neutrino having traveled from the depths of space, collides with the nucleus of an atom in the ice. This collision produces a cascade of secondary particles that momentarily travel faster than the speed of light in ice, emitting a flash of blue light, so-called Cherenkov radiation. Ice cube sensors catch this flash, and from its shape and brightness, scientists can determine the energy and direction from which the neutrino came. And so, in the very same 48 hours that 3I Atlas was firing at the Earth, IceCube registered one of the highest energy neutrinos in its entire history of observation. The event was given the bland name IC24228A. Its energy was estimated at several peta-electron volts, millions of times greater than the energy of particles in the Large Hadron Collider. Such events are a great rarity, occurring only a few times a year. But here is the most astounding part. When astrophysicists tried to determine the source of this monster neutrino, they again faced the same problem as when analyzing the trajectory of 3I Atlas. The neutrino came from an empty patch of sky. Its trajectory did not point to any known astrophysical objects capable of producing such particles. Not a blazar, not a supernova, not an active galactic nucleus. But its trajectory matched the trajectory of 3I Atlas with extreme precision. It was as if a bullet and the sound of its gunshot, having traveled billions of kilometers across the galaxy, arrived at the same point with a difference of a few months. The probability of such a coincidence is not just small, it is negligibly small. This is no longer correlation, it is causation. 3I Atlas was not just a passive piece of rock, it was active. It was a source of particles that shouldn't exist. And now we are ready to add the third, most powerful stream to our cascade. For this, we must turn to an artifact from the past, to an event that occurred almost half a century ago, but which, in light of our new data, takes on a sinister, prophetic meaning. On August 15th, 1977, the Big Ear radio telescope at Ohio State University, working on a SETI project, recorded an anomalous signal. It lasted only 72 seconds and was incredibly powerful, 30 times stronger than the background noise of space. Its frequency was 1420 megahertz, the so-called hydrogen line, the frequency at which neutral hydrogen, the most abundant element in the universe, radiates. It is believed that an intelligent civilization would most likely try to make contact on this frequency, because it is a universal constant. Astronomer Jerry Eman, reviewing the printouts, was so stunned that he circled the relevant section and wrote a single word in the margin: wow. Thus, the wow signal was born. In the decades since, scientists have never been able to find a natural explanation for it. Its source was never found. The signal never repeated. It became the holy grail for SETI enthusiasts and a headache for skeptics. But the wow signal had one key characteristic that is often forgotten. It came from the constellation Sagittarius. Now let's look at the charts again. The constellation Sagittarius. The trajectory of the wow signal, the trajectory of neutrino IC24228A, and the point in the sky from which, according to calculations, the object 3I Atlas arrived. All three vectors, separated by decades and billions of kilometers, converge in the same region of space, in that same empty region where, according to our maps, there is nothing of interest. This is no longer choreography. This is a route plotted across interstellar space. The wow signal was not just random noise. It could have been an announcement, a preliminary signal sent 50 years before the arrival of the main object. It could have been a marker buoy saying, "We are coming. Expect us." And now, all the pieces of the puzzle fall into place. The picture that emerges is both grand and terrifying. Imagine a civilization that has mastered interstellar travel. They don't send cumbersome crewed ships. They send small, fast, autonomous probes. These probes, perhaps, don't use primitive rocket engines, but some form of warp drive or exotic propulsion system that, when activated, generates high-energy neutrinos as a byproduct. This explains the event recorded by IceCube. Before entering our system, 3I Atlas performed a final braking maneuver, and this impulse was detected on Earth. Decades earlier, the same technology was used to send a powerful, focused precursor signal, the WOW signal, to check if anyone in the system was listening. And now, finally, the probe arrives. Its purpose is not contact. Its purpose is reconnaissance. It must assess the technological level of the local civilization, and the best way to do that is to deliver a precise, non-lethal, but highly sensitive strike against its most complex and vulnerable system, its global nervous system, the Internet. To do this, the probe uses some kind of energy weapon. At the moment of its activation, a powerful electromagnetic energy release occurs, which magnetometers on satellites record as the red signature. The beam itself, perhaps invisible, passes through the atmosphere and the water column. It doesn't cut the cable. It disintegrates it at a molecular level, causing localized melting and vitrification. The water in the beam's path instantly boils and cavitates, emitting that same high-frequency chirp caught by the hydrophone. It is a perfect, silent, surgical attack. And to conceal it, to ensure it is not understood correctly, it is carried out under the cover of a perfect trickster event, a terrestrial geopolitical conflict onto which all consequences can be blamed. This is not just a coincidence. This is a planned multi-stage operation, stretched out over half a century. All threads lead to one place, not to NASA, not to the White House, but to that quiet, silent object that was at that moment hurtling through our solar system, carrying out its mission. And the most disturbing question that arises from this reconstruction is not how they did it. It's what they learned from this reconnaissance. The picture we've assembled, this grand, decades-long choreography linking a radio signal from the past, a neutrino burst from deep space, and a high-precision strike on our infrastructure, brings us to the most difficult and slippery question of any such investigation. The question that lies at the heart of all conspiracy theories, from the most absurd to the most frighteningly plausible. Cui bono? Who benefits? If our reconstruction is correct, if we have indeed encountered not a chain of incredible coincidences, but the traces of intelligent, purposeful activity, then this activity must have a motive. There must be a goal. But to understand the motives of a hypothetical extraterrestrial intelligence, we first need to understand the motives of the very terrestrial power that, as we've seen, went to great lengths to cover up this event. We need to understand the psychology of the system. Why did they hide the truth? Who benefited from the world believing the story of rebels and anchors, rather than the story of a visitor from another star system armed with an energy weapon? The answer to this question is far more complex than a simple, "they want to control us." It is rooted in the very foundations of how modern society is structured, in its fears, its fragility, and its mechanisms of self-preservation. Let's imagine the situation from their perspective for a moment. You are not some abstract world ruler. You are the head of an analytical department at NORAD, or a senior science advisor at the European Space Agency, or the chair of a national security committee. One day, 3 reports land on your desk. The first is from the astronomers. They report that the interstellar object 3I Atlas is exhibiting signs of something strange, possibly artificial. The second report is from the Satellite Control Center. It reports an inexplicable magnetic pulse and the subsequent blinding of several surveillance satellites over a strategically important region. The third is from the telecommunication companies. It screams about a cascading failure of undersea cables that occurred at the same place and at the same time. You are the person whose job it is to assess threats and make decisions. What do? The first thing you realize is the scale of the unknown. You are not dealing with a known enemy whose capabilities and intentions can be assessed. You are dealing with an absolute black box. You don't know who they are. You don't know what they want. You don't know what they are capable of. You know only one thing. They possess technology that allows them from orbit to covertly strike the most protected infrastructure on the planet. This is not just a technology gap. It is an abyss. It's like facing a fighter jet with nothing but a stone axe. Your first instinctive reaction, the reaction of any complex system to an incomprehensible threat, is not panic. It's to freeze, denial, and most importantly, to seize total control of the information. Why? Reason number one, the most obvious and cynical, preventing global panic. Imagine if the next day, an official press release went out. The governments of the world's leading nations report that yesterday, an unknown object of extraterrestrial origin struck the global internet. We do not know its goals or capabilities. Please remain calm. What happens 5 minutes after such a news story breaks? The world's stock markets don't just fall, they evaporate. Indices turn to zero. All your savings, pensions, and investments cease to exist, because the economy is, first and foremost, a belief in a predictable future. And what future can be predictable when an invisible threat, capable of turning off the lights at any moment, hangs over your head? Mass hysteria would begin. People would rush to buy food, weapons, fuel. Cities would be paralyzed. Doomsday cults would gain millions of new followers. A power vacuum would emerge, which the most radical and dangerous forces would immediately try to fill. Within days or weeks, the fragile fabric of social stability that we have built over centuries would be torn to shreds, and all because of one news story. From the perspective of the system, hiding the truth is not a malevolent act. It is an act of responsibility. It is a difficult but necessary choice between a devastating truth and a life-saving lie. They choose the lie, not because they despise us, but because they fear our reaction. They believe that humanity, like a child, is simply not ready for such information. And perhaps, in some ways, they are right. Reason number two, far more profound, preserving the monopoly on violence and technology. Any state, any power structure, rests on two pillars. The first is the belief of its citizens that this structure is capable of protecting them from external and internal threats. The second is the possession of the most advanced technologies, primarily military ones. Admitting the existence of a force that is orders of magnitude superior to you, both technologically and in its ability to apply that technology, undermines both of these pillars. It is a demonstration of complete, absolute powerlessness. What is the point of aircraft carrier groups, nuclear missiles, and cyber armies if some entity can snap its fingers and switch off your civilization? This is not just a military defeat. It is an existential humiliation. It is the reduction of all earthly powers to the status of Stone Age tribes, watching in awe as a steel bird flies overhead. No power, no government, will voluntarily admit its own impotence. Instead, they will do everything to maintain the illusion of control. They will classify the data. They will launch a disinformation campaign. They will find a convenient terrestrial enemy on whom to focus the public's anger and fear. The story of the Houthis and the Anchors is not just a diversion. It is an instinctive attempt by the system to return the situation to the familiar, understandable framework of earthly geopolitics, where it is still the main player. They are moving the threat from the incomprehensible category to the manageable one. And finally, reason number three, the most pragmatic, and perhaps the most important. Technological advantage. Imagine you are an analyst at DARPA or in a secret design bureau. You receive the missing data, the radar images, the spectral analysis of the beam, the acoustic signature. You don't fully understand how it works, but you see the result. You see proof of a physical principle you never even suspected. This is the holy grail for any military engineer. It's the chance to leapfrog centuries ahead. While the whole world is discussing saboteurs, you assemble the best team of physicists, engineers, and mathematicians. Lock them in a secret lab somewhere in the Nevada desert, and give them a single task: replicate this effect. Understand how to create the same focused energy beam. If you succeed, you will have the ultimate weapon. A weapon against which there is no defense. And you, of course, will not want to share this knowledge with anyone. You will hide the very fact of its existence until you are certain that you are the only one who possesses it. In this logic, hiding the truth from the public is not just about protection from panic. It is a race. A desperate secret race for the technology of the gods. And the stakes in this race are not just military superiority, but the future of the entire human species. Whoever first unravels the secret of Three-Eye Atlas will be the one to dictate the rules of the game in the 21st and perhaps the 22nd century. Therefore, the cover-up was not just possible. It was logical. It was inevitable from the very nature of the system. They hid the truth not to protect us from panic. They hid it to buy time. Time to try to understand. Time to try to copy. Time to prepare a response that they will never tell us about. But now, let's ask the same question, cui bono, of the perpetrator itself, of the force behind Three-Eye Atlas. What was their motive? Why did they need this complex, multi-step operation? Here, we enter the realm of pure speculation. But that doesn't mean we can't build logical hypotheses based on the crumbs of information we have. Let's consider a few possible scenarios, from the most benign to the most alarming. Scenario number 1, scientific reconnaissance. Imagine an ancient, wise, and infinitely curious civilization. They are not looking for conflict. They are galactic naturalists, cartographers, librarians. They travel from star to star, cataloging life and intelligence in all its forms. When their probe approaches a system with potentially intelligent life, it conducts a standard assessment procedure. But how do you assess the developmental level of a civilization without making direct contact, which could traumatize or irreversibly change it? It's simple. You probe its most complex, most global technological system. In our case, the internet. The strike on the cables in the Red Sea, in this scenario, is not an attack. It is an experiment. It's like a doctor tapping your knee with a reflex hammer. They create a disturbance in the system and observe its reaction. How quickly does the civilization detect the problem? How accurately can it locate the source? What theories does it propose? How quickly can it reroute data flows and repair the damaged sections? How resilient is its global network? The answers to these questions give them a comprehensive picture of our technological level, our ability to coordinate, our weak points. It is a cold, detached, scientific analysis. In this scenario, they mean us no harm. To them, we are nothing more than an interesting subject of study, and the severed cables are just a planetary blood test. Scenario number 2, a warning. This option suggests a more complex and disturbing motivation. Perhaps our activities in space, our radio transmissions, satellite launches, first interplanetary missions, have been noticed, and they have been assessed as potentially dangerous. Perhaps there is a galactic community with its own rules of the road, and we, like a teenager taking a powerful car onto the highway for the first time, have begun to break these rules without even knowing they exist. In this scenario, the strike on the cables is not an attack, but a warning shot, a demonstration of power. A way of saying, we are here, we see you, we know where your pressure points are. Be quiet. It's like a person shooing away a noisy and brazen animal from their house by throwing a stone at it. The goal is not to kill, but to scare, to make it clear who is in charge. This explains why the strike was so precise and non-lethal. They didn't want to destroy us. They wanted to put us in our place, to let us know that we are not yet full players on this stage, and that further escalation on our part will have much more serious consequences. It's a grim, but in some ways, even hopeful scenario. It suggests that they are at least willing to talk to us, albeit in the language of force. Scenario number 3. Pre-invasion scouting. This is the darkest and most paranoid version, but we cannot ignore it. In this hypothesis, 3i Atlas is not just a reconnaissance probe. It is a military scout. Its task is not just to study our technologies, but to find and test a way to neutralize them before a full-scale operation begins. The global internet is not only a tool for communication and commerce. It is the nervous system of modern armed forces. It is used to control satellites, drones, missile guidance systems, and to coordinate troops. By blinding this system, you render any modern army deaf, blind, and helpless. The strike on the cables in the Red Sea, in this scenario, was a rehearsal. A dress rehearsal for the first strike in a future war. They tested their weapon. They assessed our reaction. They confirmed that we didn't even understand what had happened. And now, armed with this data, they can plan their next move. Perhaps, right now, somewhere in the depths of interstellar space, not a lone probe, but an entire fleet is heading towards us. And the first day of the war will not begin with explosions, but with silence, with a global blackout, with what we have already experienced in miniature and blamed on geopolitics. This scenario turns everything we have learned from a fascinating puzzle into a mortal threat, and it forces us to look at the actions of the system from a completely different angle. What if they are hiding the truth not because they fear panic? What if they are silent because they already know that war is inevitable and they are desperately trying to prepare, unable to tell us about it? This thought is the most terrifying of all. The thought that we are living in the last days of peace, without even knowing it. Having sorted through the possible motives, both terrestrial and extraterrestrial, we are forced to return to the source of this entire chain of events, to the darkest spot in our investigation, to the object 3i Atlas. Until now, we have spoken of it as a black box, an abstract source of anomalies. But now, armed with the evidence we have gathered, we can attempt an anatomical dissection. We must piece together all the fragments of data, from the first astronomical observations to the analysis of its energy signature, and try to reconstruct its nature. We must prove that its properties are not just strange. They are fundamentally incompatible with any known natural space object. We must prove that we are dealing with an artifact, a product of engineering so far beyond our own that we can barely find the right words for it. This is a descent into the anatomy of an anomaly, and it begins with the simplest and yet most complex question. What is it made of? When astronomers first pointed their spectrographs at 3i Atlas, they expected to see one of two pictures. If it was a comet, its spectrum should have shown absorption lines characteristic of water ice, frozen gases like carbon dioxide, and simple organic compounds. All the things that make up the dirty snowballs at the edge of our solar system. If it was an asteroid, we would have seen a spectrum typical of silicate rocks, metals like iron and nickel, or carbonaceous chondrites. The reality, as always, was far stranger. The spectrum of 3i Atlas was almost perfectly flat and dark in the visible range. It absorbed more than 99% of the sunlight that fell on it. This made it one of the darkest objects ever observed in the solar system, darker than fresh asphalt. Such a low albedo, or reflectivity, is sometimes found in primitive asteroids covered with a thick layer of complex organic compounds called tholins. But 3I Atlas had one key feature that did not fit this picture. Its spectrum in the infrared range, where we can judge an object's thermal radiation, showed an anomaly. It radiated significantly less heat than it should have, based on its distance from the sun and its size. Imagine pointing a thermal imager at two identical black stones lying in the sun. They should be equally hot, but for some reason, one of them remains cold. This is exactly how 3I Atlas behaved. This phenomenon can be explained in two ways, and both lead us into the realm of science fiction. The first explanation: the object has extremely high thermal conductivity and a highly efficient internal heat dissipation system. It doesn't just passively heat up on the one side illuminated by the sun, but instantly redistributes this heat throughout its entire volume and, perhaps, radiates it away in some other range invisible to us. This property is not characteristic of a loose conglomerate of rock and ice, but of a solid, perhaps metallic or crystalline structure. This is no longer an asteroid. This is a radiator. The second, even more exotic explanation is related to its surface. What if this is not just an organic crust, but some kind of metamaterial, engineered to absorb energy in the optical range, but have a very low emission coefficient in the infrared? Simply put, it's a perfect stealth coating, but not for radar, for thermal imagers. It allows the object to remain cold and inconspicuous even during a close flyby of a star. No known natural material has such properties. This is no longer just a rock. This is a high-tech product, an engineered alloy. And there's more. The object's behavior. As we have mentioned, 3I Atlas had virtually no coma, no cloud of gas and dust. For a comet approaching the sun, this is nonsense. The heating should have caused the sublimation of ices, the release of gas and dust. But the object remained clean. Mainstream science tried to find an explanation. The nitrogen iceberg hypothesis was proposed. The idea was that the object could be composed mainly of solid nitrogen, like the surface of Pluto. Nitrogen ice vaporizes much faster than water ice, and by the time the object entered the inner solar system, all its volatile substances could have already evaporated, leaving behind an inert core. It's a beautiful theory, but it has one fatal flaw, which was discovered by a group of independent researchers from the University of Chicago. They calculated how strong an object made of solid nitrogen would have to be to withstand the gravitational forces of the sun at such a close pass. And they concluded that it should have been torn apart by tidal forces. It should have disintegrated into a cloud of debris. But 3I Atlas maintained its integrity. It passed through perihelion, the closest point to the sun in its orbit, as a monolith. This meant that its internal structure possessed immense tensile strength, far greater than any known asteroid or comet, which are often loose rubble piles held together only by weak gravity. 3I Atlas was not a rubble pile. It was solid, perhaps even hollow, like the hull of a ship. And here we come to the most important, most irrefutable anomaly in its behavior, which the system tried to dismiss as observational error, non-gravitational acceleration. When astronomers measured the trajectory of Oumuamua with high precision in 2017, they noticed that it was deviating from the path calculated based solely on the gravitational influence of the sun and planets. It was accelerating slightly, as if something were pushing it. For comets, this is a normal phenomenon. The outgassing from the heated side acts like a small rocket engine, creating reactive thrust. But Oumuamua had no coma, no visible outgassing. This became the main argument in favor of its artificial nature. Avi Loeb suggested that Oumuamua could be a solar sail, a thin membrane pushed by the pressure of sunlight. With 3I Atlas, the story repeated itself, but with a diabolical elegance. The initial calculations of its orbit, made in the early stages, also showed a small but statistically significant non-gravitational acceleration. It wasn't moving quite as it should. But then, as it approached the sun, this acceleration disappeared. The object settled into a perfectly predictable gravitational trajectory. Official astronomical centers like the Minor Planet Center were quick to claim that the initial data was flawed, that the acceleration was a result of measurement errors when the object was still far away and its position in the sky was imprecise. Problem solved. No mystery. But what if it wasn't an error? What if it was a deliberate action? What if we were observing the operation of a propulsion system? Imagine an interstellar probe approaching its target. On the far approaches, it uses its main engine, perhaps the same one that generates neutrinos, for a final course correction. This engine activity creates the non-gravitational acceleration we noticed. But then, upon entering the inner system, where it can be observed in detail, it shuts down the engine. It switches to a passive, silent running mode, moving by inertia, perfectly masquerading as a natural object. It's like a submarine that shuts down its reactor to avoid being heard by enemy hydrophones. This is no longer just anomalous behavior. This is tactics. This is intelligent behavior aimed at concealing its true nature. It wasn't just flying, it was piloting its flight. And now we can put all these pieces together and paint a portrait of our visitor. This is not an asteroid or a comet. It is an object, estimated to be between 100 and 400 meters long, cigar-shaped or disc-shaped. Its surface is covered with a super dark, heat-insulating metamaterial that makes it almost invisible in both the optical and infrared ranges. It is a space stealth. Its hull possesses extremely high structural integrity, allowing it to withstand colossal tidal forces and, possibly, the stresses of ultra-high acceleration. This is not a loose rock. This is a monolith. It is equipped with some kind of propulsion system capable of operating in two modes: a cruise mode, which leaves a trail of neutrinos and non-gravitational acceleration, and a passive mode for stealthy approach. It is a solar machine. And finally, it carries some kind of directed energy weapon capable of generating a powerful electromagnetic pulse and delivering precise strikes on targets on a planet's surface. It is a weapons platform. The combination of all these characteristics in one object goes beyond any conceivable coincidence. The probability that nature itself, by sheer chance, would create an object that simultaneously possesses a stealth coating, a super strong hull, engines, and weapons is zero. It's like finding a fully assembled and working Swiss chronograph on a beach and claiming it was created by the random action of waves and sand. We are not looking at a miracle of nature. We are looking at a product of purposeful engineering. We are looking at a ship. But the strangest and most inexplicable thing was not even its composition or behavior. It was where it was heading after its maneuver around the sun. Any natural interstellar object, after a gravitational maneuver, should have been ejected from the solar system on a new hyperbolic trajectory. Its path should lead out, back into the void. But when independent amateur astronomers, not trusting the official calculations, began to project its future trajectory based on the latest, most accurate observations, they discovered something that made their blood run cold. Its trajectory after perihelion was not as expected. The sun didn't just eject it, it changed its course in a very specific way. The new trajectory of 3I Atlas did not lead it out of the system. It led it towards the asteroid belt. More precisely, to a very specific part of it, to the group of so-called Trojan asteroids of Jupiter, which move in the same orbit as the gas giant but 60 degrees ahead of it. This is a gravitationally stable region, a so-called Lagrange point, L4, a place where an object can remain almost indefinitely without expending energy to maintain its orbit. It is a perfect parking spot, a perfect observation deck with a view of the entire inner solar system. It wasn't leaving, it was staying. It was shifting from a fast flyby mode to a long-term observation mode. It was taking up a position. And this final maneuver, this last, most audacious anomaly, turned all the previous mysteries into something far more sinister. This was not just reconnaissance. This was deployment. The deployment of a silent, invisible sentinel that now hangs over us. And the most important unanswered question is, what is it waiting for? At this stage of our investigation, the picture seems almost complete. We have pieced together a chain of events that looks not just convincing, but practically irrefutable. We have an anomalous interstellar object with signs of artificiality. We have a series of suspicious coincidences linking its flyby to a global technological failure. We have physical evidence, from melted cables to a magnetic signature, that points to the use of an exotic weapon. We have proof of an information cover-up by the system. All threads converge. The conclusion seems inescapable. We have witnessed an act of covert aggression or reconnaissance by an extraterrestrial civilization. The conspiracy theory, it would seem, has won a complete and final victory over the boring official version. And it is precisely at this moment, when we are at the peak of our confidence, when the viewer is ready to accept our worldview, that we must take a step back. We must swing the pendulum of plausibility in the opposite direction. This is the most important, most difficult, and most honest stage of any independent investigation. We must for a time become our own harshest critics. Or we must arm ourselves with Occam's razor and try to ruthlessly cut away all the beautiful, but perhaps superfluous entities we have constructed. We must give the floor to the skeptics, because only by passing through the crucible of doubt can our theory claim to be something more than just a fascinating story. So let's forget everything we've built for a moment, and let's start from the beginning, but this time from the position of the most ardent opponent. The first and main argument of a skeptic, say, a professor of astrophysics from Princeton, would sound something like this. You have fallen victim to apophenia. Apophenia is a cognitive bias, the human brain's tendency to see structure, patterns, and meaning in random and meaningless noise. Our brains are evolutionarily wired to find patterns. It helped our ancestors survive, to see a predator in the chaos of jungle shadows, or to predict the changing seasons by the position of the stars. But this same ability plays a cruel trick on us in the modern information age. We see faces in clouds, secret messages in random texts, and of course, global conspiracies in a chain of unrelated events. The skeptic would say, you have taken 3 completely independent events and artificially linked them into a single narrative, because that story seems more interesting and significant than the prosaic reality. Let's break down this prosaic reality piece by piece. Event number 1. The severing of internet cables in the Red Sea. Is this something extraordinary? Absolutely not. Damage to undersea cables is routine. According to the International Cable Protection Committee, between 100 and 200 such incidents occur worldwide every year. 95% of them are caused by exactly what the official version pointed to: fishing trawls and anchors. The Red Sea is one of the busiest shipping lanes on the planet, and also a zone of active armed conflict. The fact that several cables were severed there on one fine day is not an anomaly. It is, unfortunately, a statistically expected event. It is a tragic, but entirely terrestrial accident, exacerbated by geopolitical tensions. Event number 2, the flyby of the interstellar object 3I Atlas. Is it really that anomalous? The skeptic would agree that the object is unusual, but they would remind us of a fundamental principle. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. All the anomalies we have listed can be explained without resorting to the hypothesis of an alien ship. The dark surface? Perhaps it is indeed a rare type of asteroid covered in complex organics that we have not yet encountered in our system. The lack of a coma? The nitrogen core hypothesis, although it has its weaknesses, has not been definitively disproven. Perhaps there are types of comets that behave differently than we are used to. The non-gravitational acceleration that appeared and then disappeared? The skeptic would point out that measurements at the limits of precision always contain errors. Perhaps it was just a data processing artifact that was later corrected. The strange trajectory leading to the Trojan asteroids? This could be just a beautiful coincidence. After all, there are billions of objects in space moving on billions of trajectories, and purely statistically, some of them will look suspicious. Each individual fact can be explained while remaining within the bounds of known physics. Yes, it requires making a few assumptions, but as Occam's razor states, a multitude of natural, albeit improbable, explanations is still preferable to a single, but completely fantastic, hypothesis about aliens. Event number 3, which we used to link the first two, the temporal coincidence. 3I Atlas was over the region, exactly when the cables were breaking. But what does over the region mean on an astronomical scale? The object was hundreds of thousands, if not millions of kilometers from Earth. The concept of zenith is quite relative for it. And what is at that time? The window of the cable incident stretched over several days. During this time, both the Earth and 3I Atlas traveled a huge distance in space. With enough desire and some flexibility in defining the boundaries of the coincidence window, you can find a correlation between anything. For example, you could claim with the same degree of certainty that the cable breaks were caused by a solar flare that occurred 2 days earlier, or an earthquake in Indonesia. Correlation, as we are rightly reminded, does not prove causation. And in a world where exabytes of data are generated every second, finding random but impressive correlations is just a matter of time and computing power. Our brain simply latches onto the one that seems most dramatic. Now let's go over our irrefutable evidence. The melted ends of the cables? A skeptic, a materials science expert, might suggest that this was the result of a short circuit. Many undersea cables contain a power element that carries high voltage to power underwater signal amplifiers. A powerful electrical arc could have formed during the break, causing the localized melting. This is a rare but known phenomenon. The missing satellite data. Technical glitches, alas, happen. Data archives are huge and complex. Losing a fragment of information is much easier than it seems. Perhaps it was a chain of banal errors, an onboard failure compounded by problems at the receiving station and topped off with a software bug in the archive. No conspiracy, just ordinary incompetence, which is common in large bureaucratic structures. The anomalous acoustic chirp? Now that's interesting, the skeptic would admit. But before jumping to conclusions about alien weapons, it's worth considering more down-to-earth options. Perhaps it was the sound emitted by some new, classified type of military sonar being tested in the region. Or maybe it was a rare geophysical phenomenon related to the release of gas from the ocean floor. The fact that we can't immediately explain something doesn't mean an explanation doesn't exist. It just means our knowledge is currently insufficient. And finally, Stephen Burns's red signature, our trump card. Here, the skeptic would be most severe. They would say that Burns is a known alarmist who has built his career on finding anomalies. His methodology, which involves aggressive noise filtering, can itself generate artifacts. When you clean a signal too diligently, you risk mistaking what is merely residual, unaccounted for noise or an error in your own algorithm for an anomaly. Furthermore, even if the pulse was real, its connection to 3I Atlas is just one possible interpretation. Perhaps it was an interaction of the satellite with some local plasma bubble in the Earth's magnetosphere, which by sheer chance occurred along the line of sight to the object. To prove a connection, you don't need one case. You need rigorous, repeatable statistics. And we don't have that. We have one main case, and one very weak, questionable hint from the past related to Oumuamua. That is not enough for a scientific revolution. Thus, the skeptical position boils down to this. You have built a grand edifice on a very shaky foundation. You have taken one routine man-made incident, one unusual but likely natural astronomical object, and linked them through a series of random correlations and ambiguously interpreted data. You have ignored simpler, albeit boring, explanations in favor of one exciting fantastic theory. You have not uncovered a conspiracy. You have invented one. It seems simple. A common comet. Unusual coincidences. Technical failures. Case closed. And we would almost be ready to agree with that. We were almost ready to admit that perhaps we had gone too far in our suspicions. But there was something else. One detail. A single, but absolutely irrefutable piece of evidence that no skeptic, no proponent of the official version has been able to explain. And this evidence takes us back to the bottom of the Red Sea. But this time, we are not looking at the cables themselves. We are looking at what lies between them. The fact is, the 4 damaged cables, AAE-1, SEACOM, EIG, and TGN Gulf, although they run along the same general corridor, are not laid right next to each other. In some sections, the distance between them is several hundred meters, and in others, up to 1.5 kilometers, almost a mile. Now let's return to our terrestrial scenarios. If it were an anchor dragging along the bottom, it would have left a continuous, unbroken furrow. It could have snapped 1 cable, maybe even 2, if they were very close. But it physically could not have snapped 4 cables spread out over a kilometer, while leaving the seabed between them completely untouched. The same goes for a sabotage team. They would have had to make 4 separate dives at 4 different points. But, as we remember, the anomalous acoustic signals and the outages occurred almost simultaneously, within a very short period of time. There wasn't enough time to move an underwater vehicle such distances. But the most crucial point, which completely demolishes the official version, is the precise synchronization of the brakes with the red signature. The magnetic pulse, recorded in orbit, was singular. But there were 4 brakes. This means that a single event in space caused 4 simultaneous but spatially separate points of damage on Earth. This cannot be explained by an anchor, a saboteur, or a short circuit. It can only be explained by one thing. The strike was not made by 1 beam, but by 4. 4 separate, perfectly focused beams that originated from a single point in space and struck 4 pre-selected targets on the ocean floor with surgical precision. This was not a coincidence. This was a volley. And this single detail, this spatial geometry of the attack, turns all skeptical arguments to dust. It brings us back to the only explanation that, however fantastic it may sound, is capable of tying all the facts together. This was not a mistake. This was not an accident. This was a deliberate, high-precision, technologically flawless operation. The fact of multiple synchronous and spatially distributed strikes became the irrefutable proof that finally brought down the edifice of the official version. It is like the decisive piece of evidence in a courtroom, after which all the defense's counter-arguments crumble to dust. We prove the what. We reconstructed the how. But to truly grasp the scale of what happened, we need to take one more step. We need to place this mystery in the broader technological context of our own time. Because the line between what we consider science fiction and what is already happening today in secret laboratories and on digital battlefields is becoming thinner, more ghostly. We often think of the idea of Star Wars, energy weapons, invisible ships, global cyber attacks as something from the distant future. But what if the future is already here? What if, without realizing it, we are already living in a world where technologies similar to those demonstrated by 3i Atlas are no longer the exclusive domain of hypothetical extraterrestrial civilizations? Let's ask ourselves a simple but unsettling question. If they can do it, why can't we? And the answer we get will force us to look anew, not only at the threat from space, but also at the forces at play here on Earth. Let's start with the most fundamental element of the attack: directed energy. The idea of transmitting energy over a distance without wires, the idea of a death ray, has captivated the minds of scientists and engineers for over 100 years, starting with the experiments of Nikola Tesla. For a long time, it remained the stuff of science fiction. But in the last 20 years, we have undergone a quiet revolution. We have learned to create and control beams of energy with unprecedented precision. The first step was lasers. Today, high-energy laser systems are no longer exotic. They are in service. The American LAWS, Laser Weapon System, has been tested on warships for years, successfully shooting down drones. Israel's Iron Beam is preparing to go on combat duty to intercept rockets and mortar shells. These systems operate in the infrared range, their beams invisible to the human eye. They can burn through a drone's fuselage or detonate a rocket's warhead in seconds. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. In laboratories, next-generation lasers are already being created. Femtosecond lasers, capable of generating pulses lasting quadrillionths of a second, but with a peak power exceeding that of all the power plants on Earth combined. Such lasers can create self-focusing filaments in the air, channels of ionized plasma that act as waveguides, allowing energy to be transmitted for kilometers with minimal loss. But lasers are just one tool. There's another, perhaps even more promising path: microwave radiation. We are all familiar with it from our microwave ovens, which use it to heat food. But if you concentrate the same energy not in an enclosed space, but in a narrow beam, you get a powerful weapon. The American Active Denial System is a non-lethal weapon that uses a directed beam of millimeter waves to cause an unbearable burning sensation in a person hundreds of meters away, forcing them to flee. This is already a reality. And what if we go further? What if we use more powerful generators, so-called gyrotrons, and huge phased array antennas, similar to those used in missile defense systems like HAARP in Alaska? Theoretically, such a system, located on the ground or on an orbital platform, could focus a beam of microwave energy on any point on the planet. Such a beam could disable electronics, cause communication system failures, and, with sufficient power, have a physical effect. For example, boiling water. A familiar signature, isn't it? Officially, such projects are in the research stage. But who can say for sure what has already been created in secret programs whose budgets are hidden in the black parts of military spending? Now let's go up to orbit. The idea of placing weapons in space, so-called space militarization, was a major scare tactic during the Cold War under the Strategic Defense Initiative, or SDI. Back then, they talked about nuclear-pumped X-ray lasers and railguns that accelerated kinetic projectiles. Most of these projects were shelved as too expensive and technologically complex. But the idea itself did not die. It just mutated. Today, the militarization of space is happening quietly, almost invisibly, under the cover of civilian and commercial programs. Take, for example, the mysterious X-37B unmanned spaceplane, belonging to the U.S. Space Force. This vehicle, resembling a scaled-down space shuttle, can spend years in orbit on secret missions and then return to Earth. Officially, it is for testing new technologies. But which ones exactly? No one knows. Its cargo bay is large enough to house reconnaissance equipment, maneuvering inspector satellites, and, theoretically, a compact directed energy system. Is it possible that it is already being used to test a weapon capable of striking ground, sea, or even underwater targets from space? We can't say for sure, but we can't rule it out either. But the most alarming thing is not the hardware itself, not the lasers or the space planes. The most frightening technological revolution is happening in the field of control and targeting. It's associated with two letters: AI, artificial intelligence. The strike on the cables in the Red Sea was distinguished not only by its power, but also by its incredible precision. 4 beams, fired from a single point in space, hit 4 small targets at a depth of 2 kilometers, 1.2 miles, targets that are constantly in motion due to currents. Such a shot requires a guidance system that surpasses anything we can imagine. It must track the position of the source and the target in real time, account for the refraction of the beam in the atmosphere and water, and compensate for the Earth's rotation. Doing this manually is impossible, but for a modern military AI, it is a solvable problem. Neural networks are already used to analyze satellite images, recognize targets, and plot optimal trajectories for missiles and drones. They can process huge streams of data and make decisions in milliseconds. What if you combine such a neural network with an orbital platform equipped with a directed energy weapon? You get the perfect, soulless, absolutely effective sniper with a global range. A system capable of hitting any target, anywhere on the planet, with absolute precision, on command, or even autonomously. And here we come to the most important point. The technologies needed to carry out an attack like the one we attribute to 3I Atlas, directed energy, orbital platforms, AI-based guidance systems, are no longer science fiction. They are the cutting edge of terrestrial military development. The gap between their technology and ours may not be as large as it first appears. And this raises 2 frightening questions. First, could we have witnessed the testing of some secret terrestrial weapon? What if there was no 3I Atlas, but just a convenient cosmic scapegoat whose flyby was used to test a new system and blame the consequences on it and the geopolitical conflict? This is a classic false flag operation scenario, but on a cosmic scale. It would explain the precision of the strike and the subsequent data cover-up. The system wasn't hiding the truth because it was afraid of aliens, but because it was protecting its own most valuable military secret. In this version, the enemy is not in space. It is here, among us. But there is a second, even more disturbing question. We are learning to create illusions in the sky. We are launching thousands of satellites, creating synthetic heavens. Our militaries are developing technologies for information warfare, for creating deep fakes and manipulating public consciousness. We are becoming masters of deception and disinformation. But what if someone has long been using these same methods against us? What if the object 3I Atlas itself, with all its anomalies, was not a ship, but an illusion, a hologram, some complex projection artifact created to cover the real source of the attack, which could have been somewhere else entirely? This idea seems crazy, but it follows logically from our own technological development. If we can create a digital deepfake of a person, why couldn't a more advanced civilization create a physical deepfake of a space object? This hypothesis turns our entire worldview into a shadow play, where we can be sure of nothing. We see what we are allowed to see. And the Red Sea incident might not have been just an attack. It might have been a lesson, a demonstration that whoever controls information and technology controls reality itself. This thought takes us beyond a simple investigation. It plunges us into a state of deep technological paranoia. We can no longer trust even our own eyes and instruments because they can be deceived. And the silence that followed the incident is not just a cover-up. It is part of the performance, part of the illusion that makes us look to the stars for an enemy, while it may have been sitting in the next room all along, pulling the strings. When an investigation reaches such heights of speculation, when the lines between fact, hypothesis, and technological paranoia blur, it is necessary to pause, to step away from the maps, the graphs, and the data streams and ask ourselves the most fundamental, the most profound questions. Because the mystery of Three Eye Atlas is no longer just a detective story about damaged cables and hidden files. It has grown to the scale of an existential challenge. It forces us to look in a mirror, but not an ordinary one. One that reflects not our faces, but our entire place in the universe. What does it mean for humanity if we are not alone? What does it mean if we are being watched? And, most terrifyingly, what does it mean if our reality is not an immutable given, but a carefully constructed stage on which we are merely actors, unaware of the plot or who is sitting in the audience? This is a descent into the philosophical horizon, into the existential abyss that opens up under our feet when the familiar picture of the world collapses. And this descent begins with the most famous and most unsettling question in the history of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence: the Fermi paradox. In 1950, during a lunch with colleagues at the Los Alamos National Laboratory, the brilliant physicist Enrico Fermi asked a simple, almost childlike question: where is everybody? The logic behind this question was impeccable. Our galaxy, the Milky Way, is vast. It contains, by the most conservative estimates, from 100 to 400 billion stars. Many of these stars, as we now know thanks to the Kepler telescope, have planetary systems. Some of these planets are in the so-called habitable zone, where conditions allow for liquid water. If life, and then intelligence, arose on even a tiny fraction of these planets, then over the billions of years of the galaxy's existence, the oldest of these civilizations would have had more than enough time to develop interstellar travel and colonize the entire galaxy. Even at very slow, sublight speeds, this would have taken only a few tens of millions of years. A cosmic blink of an eye. This means that by now, the entire galaxy should be teeming with life. We should see them everywhere. See their megastructures, hear their radio communications, stumble upon their probes. But we see nothing. The cosmos is silent. This deafening universal quiet is the great silence, the essence of the Fermi paradox. Where is everybody? And the story of Three Eye Atlas offers us several possible and increasingly disturbing answers to this question. The first answer, the most optimistic, is that we simply don't know how to listen. We are like a native sitting on the shore of an ocean with a seashell to his ear, hearing nothing but the sound of the surf and concluding that beyond the horizon there are no continents, no cities, no civilizations. Our search methods are mostly passive listening in the radio spectrum. But what if advanced civilizations long ago abandoned such a primitive and loud method of communication as radio? What if they communicate using modulated neutrino streams, gravitational waves, or some kind of quantum-entangled networks, which to us are nothing more than background noise? In this scenario, Three Eye Atlas is not an anomaly. It is the norm. This is how interaction in the galaxy occurs. Quiet, stealthy probes conducting reconnaissance without violating a prime directive of non-interference in the development of young civilizations. The great silence in this case is not a sign of the absence of life. It is a sign of its maturity, its wisdom, its caution. The cosmos is silent not because it is empty. It is silent because speaking loudly is rude and dangerous. And our incident in the Red Sea was just an accidental whisper that we picked up by mistake. But there is a second, much darker answer to Fermi's question. It is known as the dark forest hypothesis, popularized by the Chinese science fiction author Liu Cixin. Imagine the universe not as a friendly place for meetings and knowledge exchange, but as a dark, dangerous forest. In this forest, everyone is a hunter. And everyone tries to move silently, holding their breath. Because if you discover another, you don't know if they are friend or foe, but you know for sure that they are armed. And the first thing they might do upon discovering you is shoot, just in case, to eliminate a potential threat. In such a universe, the only survival strategy is to be silent. Never answer a call from another. Never reveal your location. Any civilization that starts loudly proclaiming its existence, sending radio signals in all directions, is like an inexperienced hunter who builds a bright fire in the forest and sings songs. Sooner or later, another, more experienced and ruthless hunter will be drawn to the light of that fire. In this terrifying model, the great silence is the silence of a graveyard. The cosmos is silent because everyone who spoke loudly is already dead, and those who survived have learned the main rule: hide. In this paradigm, 3i Atlas appears in a completely different light. It is not a scientific probe, it is a hunter probe. Its task is to find such fires as our civilization. And the strike on the cables was not just reconnaissance, it was a test bite, an assessment of how dangerous this new, noisy life form, crawling out of its cradle, might be. And our future depends on the results of this assessment. Perhaps we have been deemed non-threatening and simply noted. Or perhaps the sentence has already been passed, and the one who will carry it out is now on its way. This hypothesis forces us to look at the nature of contact in a new way. We are used to imagining first contact as something out of Hollywood movies, a giant ship hovering over the White House, wise ambassadors, an exchange of knowledge. But what if we are wrong? What if real contact is not a loud event, but a slow, gradual, almost imperceptible process that is already underway? What if objects like Oumuamua and 3i Atlas are already contact? Not with us, as a civilization, but with our technology. Perhaps they are not interested in us, our culture, philosophy, biology. To them, we are nothing more than mold growing on this piece of rock. The only thing that interests them is our technological potential, our ability to leave the planet and perhaps become a competitor or a threat to them. This is the so-called Bracewell probe hypothesis. As far back as 1960, the astronomer Ronald Bracewell suggested that an advanced civilization would not waste resources on manned flights, but would instead send out millions of autonomous observer probes across the galaxy. These probes would lie dormant in stable orbits in other star systems and activate only upon detecting signs of technological activity, such as radio signals. 3i Atlas fits this model perfectly. It woke up when our radio signals reached its post somewhere in the Oort cloud. It arrived, conducted its assessment, and took up a new observation post at a Lagrange point to continue monitoring. In this scenario, we are not just under observation, we are living in a kind of quarantine, in a galactic preserve, and we are allowed to develop only as long as we do not become a threat to the wardens. And the incident in the Red Sea was the first warning that we are getting too close to the boundaries of the enclosure. All these reflections lead us to a realization of the fundamental fragility of our civilization. We have built an incredibly complex, interconnected world that hangs by the thinnest threads of fiber optics and invisible data streams. We are proud of our technological prowess, but this power is also our greatest vulnerability. 3i Atlas showed that our entire global structure can be paralyzed by a single, precise strike that we are not even able to correctly identify. We are like a person who has built a magnificent castle of glass, unaware that they live in a world where everyone has stones. This fragility is not only technological, but also psychological. Our entire worldview, our religions, our philosophical systems are built on one unspoken axiom, the axiom of our loneliness and our uniqueness. We are the pinnacle of creation, the only intelligent species in the observable universe. What will happen to this worldview if this axiom turns out to be false? What will happen to faith when knowledge appears? The knowledge that we are not the first, not the only, and perhaps far from the smartest. This realization could lead not to enlightenment, but to collapse, to a loss of meaning, to existential despair. And perhaps the Great Silence is not a conspiracy or a graveyard. Perhaps it is an act of mercy. Perhaps wise civilizations are silent because they know that the truth can kill. They know that the knowledge of their existence, for a young and psychologically fragile civilization like ours, would be like staring into the abyss, and they are protecting us from that gaze. But 3i Atlas broke this unspoken rule. It allowed us to peek over the edge, and now we cannot unsee what we have seen. We are condemned to knowledge, and this sentence may be more terrible than any invasion. Perhaps the silence of space is not the absence of life. Perhaps it is a sign of respect that the survivors pay to those who could not bear to face reality. The philosophical depths into which we have plunged can create a sense of helplessness and paralysis. The realization of our fragility, the confrontation with the dark forest hypothesis, and the burden of tragic knowledge, all of this can lead to the conclusion that the game is over, and we are just pawns in it. But the investigation cannot end here. Intellectual awe is not the finale, but a catalyst. It forces us to shift our attention from the past, from reconstructing events that have already happened, to the future. Because if our theory is correct, if 3i Atlas is not a random visitor but part of some ongoing process, then this story is not over. There will be next acts. There will be new events. And our task now is not just to analyze the past, but to try to predict the future. We must find the next moment of truth, the coming event that could either confirm our boldest hypotheses or completely refute them. We must shift our focus from what was to what will be. We must look into the inevitable future. And that future has a specific name, date, and target. It is called the Hera mission. To understand why this seemingly routine space mission becomes the centerpiece of our future drama, we need to take a brief detour into the field known as planetary defense. For decades, Hollywood has fed us the same scenario. A giant, killer asteroid is heading for Earth, and a team of brave heroes led by Bruce Willis flies to meet it and blow it up with a nuclear bomb. In reality, things are, of course, more complex and, fortunately, less dramatic. NASA, ESA, and other space agencies around the world constantly monitor near-Earth space, cataloging all asteroids whose orbits intersect with Earth's. To date, we know of almost all the large objects capable of causing a global catastrophe, and none of them pose a threat in the next 100 years. But the problem is with the smaller objects, ranging from 100 to 300 meters in size. Such a rock would not destroy civilization, but its impact on a major city would be equivalent to the explosion of a powerful hydrogen bomb. And there are thousands of such objects in our system, most of which we have not yet discovered. Therefore, scientists faced a task, not just to find them, but to learn how to change their trajectory. And that is precisely why the first mission in human history to change the orbit of an asteroid was conceived. It consisted of two parts. The first part, called DART, Double Asteroid Redirection Test, belonged to NASA. It was, in essence, a guided projectile, a space kamikaze. Its target was the small asteroid Dimorphos, which is a moon of the larger asteroid Didymos. In September of 2022, the DART spacecraft slammed into Dimorphos at a speed of over 6 kilometers per second, about 13,400 millimeters. The impact was a success. Observations from Earth showed that Dimorphos's orbital period around Didymos had changed, even more so than models had predicted. For the first time in history, humanity proved that it could move a celestial body, but that was only half the story. To turn this crude experiment into a precise science, we need to see the consequences of the impact up close, to study the crater that DART left, to assess the amount of ejected material, to understand how the asteroid's structure reacted to the kinetic impact. And that is what the second part of the mission, the Hera spacecraft from the European Space Agency, is for. Hera is not an impact probe. It is a detective, a space forensic scientist. Its launch is scheduled for October of 2024. 2 years later, in late 2026, it will arrive at the Didymos Dimorphos system and begin a detailed investigation of the crime scene. It will create detailed maps of the asteroids, study their chemical composition, measure their mass with high precision, and most importantly, examine in detail the very crater left by its American predecessor. The official goal of the Hera mission is noble and understandable: to refine our methods of protecting the planet from the asteroid threat. But what if this mission has another unspoken, secret purpose? Let's go back to our timeline and look at it from a new angle. The DART mission was conceived and launched long before the appearance of 3I Atlas. But what happened after the impact? For several months after the collision, the Didymos Dimorphos system behaved strangely. The amount of ejected material turned out to be much greater than expected. The asteroid Dimorphos grew 2 long dust tails, making it look like a comet. Astronomers were thrilled with this abundance of new data. But what if this unexpected behavior was not just a scientific stroke of luck? What if the DART impact didn't just change Dimorphos' orbit, but activated something inside it? Remember that we believe many asteroids are not monolithic bodies, but rubble piles. What if, hidden inside this rubble pile, under a layer of rock and dust, was some kind of artifact? An ancient probe, like the ones Bracewell described, that had been dormant for millions of years. The DART impact could have damaged it, caused a leak of fuel or propellant, which led to the formation of the anomalous dust tails. This hypothesis may seem far-fetched, but it takes on a sinister meaning if we recall the trajectory of 3I Atlas. Where was it heading after its maneuver around the Sun? To the Trojan asteroids of Jupiter. But its trajectory, as calculations showed, also passed relatively close to the asteroid belt. And if you overlay its path on a map of the solar system, it turns out that it made a flyby of the Didymos Dimorphos system. Too far for a rendezvous, but close enough to conduct a detailed scan. And here, an alternative, conspiratorial scenario emerges. The DART impact on Dimorphos was not just an experiment. It was a desperate, perhaps even reckless, act. It was an attempt to wake up, or conversely, destroy something that the system may have known about for a long time. This attempt led to unpredictable consequences, the activation of the object. And this activation, in turn, served as a signal that attracted the attention of an external observer. 3I Atlas. It arrived to assess the situation, to check what had happened to one of their ancient sentinels, and perhaps to deliver a retaliatory strike on our infrastructure as a warning: do not touch what does not belong to you. In this worldview, the Hera mission ceases to be just a scientific expedition. It becomes a rescue, or conversely, a liquidation operation. Its official task is to study the crater, but its true, unspoken purpose may be completely different. Perhaps it is supposed to assess the condition of the damaged artifact, to try to establish contact with it, or, if it poses a threat, to find a way to permanently neutralize it. In this interpretation, space transforms from a scientific playground into a battlefield, where the first skirmish has already taken place, and now both sides are preparing for the next round, sending their investigators to the scene of the incident. That is why we must follow the Hera mission with such close attention. It becomes that window, that moment of truth. And there are several key points that will serve as markers for us. The first is the launch itself in October 2024. Will it proceed normally? Will there be any unexplained delays or last-minute technical glitches? Any attempt to postpone the mission could be a sign that some forces are trying to prevent us from reaching Dimorphos. The second, and most important point, is the spacecraft's arrival at its target in late 2026. What will it show us? Will we see an ordinary, boring crater on the surface of an asteroid? Or will Hera's camera show us something else? Debris with unnaturally regular geometry? A surface with a metallic sheen under a layer of dust? Anomalous thermal or electromagnetic signatures emanating from the asteroid's depths? The first images that Hera sends back to Earth could become the most important images in human history. And this raises the main question: will we even see them? Let's remember our experience with the missing satellite data over the Red Sea. The system has already demonstrated its ability and willingness to control information. What's to stop them from doing the same with the Hera mission? Imagine the scenario. The spacecraft arrives at Dimorphos. Its cameras show something incredible, but we won't know about it. Instead, we'll get an official announcement. Unfortunately, a few hours before the close approach to the asteroid, a communication system failure occurred on board the Hera spacecraft. We are doing everything possible to restore contact, or the received images were heavily distorted by a solar flare and require extensive processing and verification, which will take several months. Months will turn into years. Special commissions will be created. Blurry, indistinct images on which nothing can be discerned will be published. And the real data, the data that could change the world, will end up in the same digital quarantines where the images of the Red Sea surface already lie. The familiar architecture of silence will begin, and we will once again be left with nothing but suspicions. Therefore, our task is not just to wait. Our task is to watch. To watch the mission itself, all official communications, the back-channel rumors. To look for inconsistencies, delays, strange turns of phrase, and most importantly, to watch the reaction of the other side. Because if 3i Atlas is indeed a sentinel that has taken up a position at the Lagrange point, then it too will be watching Hera's arrival, and its reaction to our intrusion into its territory could be the most important signal of all. Will we see new magnetic anomalies, new unexplained glitches, or perhaps this time it will decide that enough warnings have been given? The countdown has already begun, and the finale of this drama will play out not on Earth, but out there, in the cold void, 60 million kilometers, about 37 million miles, away from us, near a small, unremarkable asteroid that could be either the key to our salvation or Pandora's box. While we follow the slow, almost meditative movement of spacecraft and build hypotheses about galactic conspiracies, it is very easy to lose sight of one critically important aspect of this story: the human factor. It's easy to imagine the system as an impersonal, monolithic machine, and the seekers as an abstract network of anonymous nicknames. But behind every byte of information, behind every line of code, behind every pixel on a satellite image, there are living people. People with their own motives, fears, hopes, and their own price. And it is on this, the human level, that the most fierce, though quietest battle in this information war is being fought. It is a battle of Davids against Goliaths, a battle of individuals armed with curiosity and a laptop against the gigantic machine of concealment with its limitless resources. To understand the full drama and risk of this confrontation, we must shift our focus from space to the ground for a moment. We must tell the stories of those oracles and seekers who became key figures in our investigation, because their fates are the true price of knowledge. Let's return to Stefan Burns, our digital oracle who unearthed the red signature in the magnetometer logs. For us, his discovery was a triumph, a turning point. But for Burns himself, it marked the beginning of a very difficult period. As soon as he published his findings on his Carnegie Group's website, complete with detailed methodology and links to the source data, he expected a strong reaction. He expected debate, criticism, perhaps even acknowledgement from more daring colleagues in academia. But instead, he hit a wall of organized, icy silence. His publication was simply ignored. No major scientific journal mentioned his work. None of his former geophysicist colleagues answered his emails asking them to verify his calculations. This was the first and most effective tactic of the system. Not to argue, not to refute, but simply to pretend you don't exist. In today's information-overloaded world, the silence of authoritative sources is the most effective way to marginalize an inconvenient idea. If nature, science, or NASA aren't talking about it, then it simply doesn't exist. It's noise, unworthy of the attention of serious people. But Burns and his community did not give up. They launched their own information dissemination campaign. They posted on Reddit, published threads on X, created videos explaining the essence of their discovery in simple terms, and the information began to seep out. Thousands, and then tens of thousands, of people around the world downloaded their report, checked their code, asked questions, and that's when the system moved to the second stage. A discrediting campaign began. Suddenly, articles on the problem of pseudoscience and open-source data analysis appeared on several reputable science blogs and in online publications known for their close ties to the defense industry. Burns's name was not mentioned directly, but the targets were obvious. The authors, respected professors with impeccable reputations, condescendingly discussed how easily amateurs can make mistakes, how dangerous excessive noise filtering is, how important it is to trust only peer-reviewed sources. It was a classic move. Attack, not the data itself, but the credibility of the person who found it. Without naming him, they portrayed Burns as a dilettante, a conspiracy theorist, a man who sees things that aren't there. It was an attack on his reputation, designed to scare away any potential support from the scientific community. But when that didn't work either, when the discussion of the red signature continued to gain momentum on independent platforms, the system used its third, dirtiest trick. Direct pressure began. At first, it was small things. The KARG website was hit by a series of powerful DDoS attacks that took it offline for several days. Then Burns started noticing strange things in his digital life. Attempts to hack his email and cloud storage, strange clicks during phone calls. But the culmination was a visit. One evening, two men in stern, unremarkable suits came to his home. They didn't threaten him. They didn't make any accusations. They introduced themselves as employees of a small government agency concerned with the security of critical infrastructure. Their conversation was polite, almost friendly. They said they had read his curious research with great interest. They praised his analytical skills. And then, casually, they hinted that his work, touching on matters of national security and the stability of global communications, could be misinterpreted by certain hostile elements. They advised him, purely for patriotic reasons, to refrain from further public speculation on the topic. It was not a direct threat. It was something worse. It was a cold, polite hint that he was being watched, that he had crossed an invisible line and entered a territory where different rules apply. After that visit, Stefan Burns went silent for several weeks. His story is a classic example of how the system neutralizes a threat. First, ignore, then, discredit, and finally, intimidate. But the story of the Seekers is not just one of pressure. It is also a story of incredible ingenuity and courage. Take, for example, the person who first found the anomalous acoustic chirp. He was not an oceanographer. He was a young biology graduate student from the Netherlands, let's call him Leo, who was writing a dissertation on the communication of blue whales. It was for this purpose that he downloaded the multi-terabyte archive of recordings from that hydrophone off the coast of Somalia. He was running these recordings through a spectrum analyzer, looking for the low-frequency songs of whales. And completely by accident, he stumbled upon those 4 short, high-frequency bursts that did not fit the acoustic landscape of the ocean at all. At first, he dismissed them as a technical glitch, interference, but his scientific curiosity got the better of him. He started digging. He contacted the engineers who serviced the buoy, who confirmed that the equipment was working properly that day. He ran the signal through dozens of filters and confirmed it was not an artifact. Only then did he realize he had stumbled upon something important. But what was he to do with this knowledge? He understood that if he published it in a scientific journal, his paper would likely be rejected as off-topic. If he went to the authorities, he would most likely be ignored. And so he did what many young scientists, disillusioned with the slow and conservative academic system, do today. He went to the internet. He anonymously published his finding on a subreddit dedicated to OSINT, Open Source Intelligence. And it was there that his post was noticed by us. Leo's story is a hymn to citizen science. It proves that a great discovery today can be made not only by a multi-billion-dollar observatory, but by a single graduate student armed with curiosity and access to open data. These people, Stefan, Leo, and the hundreds of others who helped us analyze data, translate documents, build models, are the true heroes of this story. They are a modern, decentralized, global intelligence agency, working not for money or fame, but for the pure pursuit of truth. They have created their own parallel infrastructure for knowledge exchange, encrypted chats, anonymous forums, distributed computing networks. They act like a swarm. When the system strikes one of them, as it did with Burns, others pick up his work and continue it. When official archives block access to data, they find workarounds, use mirrors, share information via torrents. They are the embodiment of information guerrilla warfare, partisans in the digital jungle. But their work has not gone unnoticed. Soon after our theory began to gain traction, we noticed that strange participants had appeared in our ranks. Accounts created only a few weeks ago, asking overly specific questions, trying to find out the sources of our information, phishing attempts targeting key members of our community, subtly disguised disinformation planted in our chats to sow doubt and discord. It was obvious. The system had moved from external attack to infiltration. They couldn't silence us, so now they were trying to destroy us from within. The battle moved from open forums into the shadows. It became a cat-and-mouse game, where every new member of the community could be either an ally or a spy. This created an atmosphere of paranoia, but it also tempered us. We learned to be more careful, to check sources, to trust, but verify. We realized that we were fighting a war not only for information, but for our community itself. And this struggle, this human drama unfolding behind the scenes of our investigation, is perhaps no less important than the mystery of 3i Atlas itself, because it shows that even in a world of total control and all-seeing corporations, the spirit of independent inquiry cannot be destroyed. Like grass, it will always find a way to break through the concrete. We have come a long way. We have descended to the dark floor of the Red Sea, ascended to the cold orbits of satellites, delved into digital archives, and even peered into the existential abyss of the Fermi paradox. We have gathered evidence, built theories, given the floor to skeptics, and told the story of the human drama behind this investigation. And now, at the end of this journey, we must do what every investigator does upon closing a complex case. We must return to the beginning. Return to the very first event, to the trickster incident that served as the starting point for this entire story. We must look again at the severing of the internet cables, but no longer with the eyes of a bewildered observer, but armed with all the knowledge we have accumulated. We must come full circle, because only now, In light of everything we have learned, does the original mystery acquire its true, deeper, and far more disturbing meaning? What seemed to us an act of chaotic vandalism or the collateral damage of a geopolitical conflict now appears before us as a perfectly planned, multi-layered operation, every aspect of which was conceived with a cold, inhuman precision. And only now are we beginning to understand how brilliant its design was. Let's once more recall the official version: anchors or saboteurs. This version was not just a lie. It was a perfect camouflage because it exploited our own human biases and cognitive distortions. It offered us an enemy we expected to see, a man with a gun and malicious intent. It appealed to our habit of seeking explanations within the familiar logic of our terrestrial world: politics, war, economics. The system didn't invent this version from scratch. It simply chose, from all possible explanations, the one that was most plausible to us. They knew that our brains, faced with two options, a complex geopolitical sabotage operation and a strike from an extraterrestrial probe, would instinctively choose the first, because it doesn't require a complete overhaul of one's worldview. This wasn't just a smokescreen. It was a psychological trap, and we all fell for it. But now, knowing about the red signature, the multiple points of impact, the strange trajectory of Three-Eye Atlas, we can see that this trickster was not just a cover. It was an integral part of the operation itself. The timing and location of the strike were not accidental. They were dictated not only by the object's orbital mechanics, but also by the situation on Earth. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait region in early 2024 was perhaps the only place on the planet where such an incident could be so easily and convincingly blamed on a third party. Had they carried out the same attack in the Pacific Ocean or the North Atlantic, the absence of culprit ships and marks on the seabed would have raised far more questions. But here, at the epicenter of a global crisis, no one would bother with a detailed investigation. Everyone was too busy discussing the Houthis, shipping, and oil prices. This was not just camouflage. It was the use of our own chaos against us. They used our war as a shield for theirs. But the genius of the plan ran even deeper. Let's look at the choice of target. Why the undersea cables? Why not power plants, military bases, or government centers? A strike on any of those targets would have been unequivocally perceived as an act of aggression. It would have triggered an immediate and possibly even nuclear response. It would have consolidated humanity in the face of an external threat. But a strike on internet cables, that's something else entirely. First, it's an attack whose consequences are felt by everyone, but which does not directly threaten anyone's life. It causes frustration, economic losses, but not panic and terror. It's a soft attack that allows for an assessment of the system's reaction without provoking it to extreme measures. Second, as we've already seen, damage to cables is an event for which there is always a ready, natural explanation. It's an attack with plausible deniability. And third, and most importantly, it's a strike on a domain where the line between civilian and military infrastructure is maximally blurred. The internet is both Facebook and the Pentagon. By damaging it, you simultaneously harm the global economy and the military's ability to coordinate. You are testing the resilience of the entire nervous system of a civilization, from its reflexes to its higher cognitive functions. And all of this under the cover of an event that looks like an unfortunate technological accident. This was not just a shot. This was vivisection, performed under local anesthesia so the patient wouldn't flinch too much. And only now do we arrive at the final, most shocking revelation, which ties all the threads together and calls into question the very nature of what we observed. We have been operating under the assumption that the red signature, the magnetic pulse, was a side effect of the shot, the muzzle flash of an energy weapon. But what if we've reversed cause and effect? What if it was the other way around? What if the pulse itself was the weapon, and the damage to the cables was just one of its many, and perhaps not even the most important consequences? Let's recall the phenomenon known as an electromagnetic pulse, EMP. We know about it mainly in the context of a nuclear explosion. A high-altitude nuclear detonation generates a powerful gamma-ray burst, which by interacting with the Earth's atmosphere, knocks electrons out of atoms and creates an avalanche of Compton electrons. This moving charge, in turn, generates a gigantic but very short pulse of an electromagnetic field that spreads for hundreds and thousands of miles. This pulse is lethal to any unprotected electronics. It induces huge voltage spikes in long conductors like power lines, telephone cables, and of course undersea internet backbones, which instantly fry transformers, microchips, and amplifiers. After such a strike, a technological stone age descends upon a vast area. Now, let's imagine a civilization that has learned to generate such a pulse not with a crude nuclear explosion, but with some compact, controllable device. A device that can fire a focused beam of EMP at a specific point on the planet. What would happen if such a beam were directed at the corridor of undersea cables in the Red Sea? First, the pulse itself, passing through the magnetosphere, would cause precisely the local disturbance in the magnetic field that the satellites recorded. The red signature is the trace of the weapon itself. Second, this pulse would induce a monstrous current in the copper power lines that run parallel to the optical fibers in the cables. This current would instantly burn out and disable all the underwater amplifiers and repeaters in that section. The cable would go blind and deaf. The data stream would be interrupted. But the most interesting thing would happen at the points where the circuit is broken. At the points of damage, a powerful electric arc would form, an underwater lightning bolt. The temperature of this arc can reach several thousand degrees, and it is this that would cause the melting and vitrification that so puzzled the engineers. In this model, we no longer need to invent some exotic vaporizer beam. All the physical damage turns out to be a secondary effect, caused by the EMP strike itself. This hypothesis elegantly explains all the facts we have observed, from the magnetic anomaly in orbit to the melted ends on the ocean floor. But it also opens up a completely new, even more disturbing layer to this story. If it was an EMP strike, then its target was not just the cables. Its target was all the electronics in the affected zone. This means that in those fateful minutes in the Red Sea area, other non-internet related failures should have been occurring. Mass failures of GPS navigators on ships, malfunctions of radars, interference in radio communications. The problem is, in a zone of active conflict, such minor glitches are routine. They are easily blamed on the work of electronic warfare, EW systems, which are actively used by all sides of the conflict. And here it is, the final, diabolical beauty of this plan. They didn't just hide their attack behind a geopolitical crisis. They hid their hyper-advanced weapon by imitating our own, much more primitive one. They delivered a strike that looked to all observers like the result of ordinary terrestrial jammers. The AWS outage that occurred around the same time, which many considered a simple coincidence, ceases to be a coincidence in this model. It becomes another victim. Perhaps the EMP also affected ground-based data centers in the region, causing a cascade failure. And only now do we begin to understand the true scale. This was not just an attack on the internet. It was a comprehensive test of a weapon aimed at the total suppression of all electronic infrastructure in a given area. And the cables were just the most visible, most obvious victim, which served as the trickster that distracted attention from everything else. The AWS outage wasn't a coincidence. It was cover. And what they were hiding wasn't on the servers. It was in the signal itself. In that very red signature that wasn't a side effect, but the weapon itself. A weapon that we cannot yet replicate, let alone defend against. And so we stand at the summit. A dizzying, cold, and lonely summit of knowledge. We have traveled the entire path, from a vague suspicion to a coherent, almost irrefutable theory. We have connected the dots that no one dared to connect. We have deciphered a message written in the language of magnetic pulses and digital silence. We see the strings. We see the architecture. We see the choreography, played out on a planetary stage. But what now? What do we do with this knowledge? This is the moment that comes at the end of any tragedy, when the hero, having learned the terrible truth about the world and himself, is left alone on an empty stage as the curtain slowly falls. It is the moment of acquiring tragic knowledge. Knowledge that brings neither joy nor relief, but only the heavy burden of understanding. Knowledge that separates you from the rest of the world, which continues to live in blissful ignorance. We, those who have followed this investigation to the end, you, our viewers, and we, your guides, are no longer like everyone else. We are now the keepers of a secret, and this knowledge both empowers us and condemns us to isolation. Recall the ancient Greek myth of Cassandra. The Trojan princess, gifted by the god Apollo with the power of prophecy, was also cursed by him. No one would ever believe her predictions. She cried out about the coming fall of Troy, she warned of the wooden horse, but her words were dismissed as the ravings of a madwoman. She knew the truth, but was utterly powerless to change anything. Her knowledge became her personal hell. And today, we, the community of seekers, find ourselves in the position of this modern, digital Cassandra. We have gathered the evidence. We have built the logical chain. We are shouting that the official version is a lie, that behind the chaos of terrestrial conflicts hides a cold, inhuman intelligence that has already conducted a successful reconnaissance in force. We publish our reports on anonymous forums, we create these videos, we try to get through. But what happens in response? Our findings are drowned out. They are drowned in the endless, churning ocean of information noise. For every one of our carefully constructed pieces of evidence, there are thousands of posts about political scandals, cryptocurrency prices, celebrity gossip. Our story, however grand and important it may seem to us, is, for most, just another conspiracy theory among hundreds of others about a flat earth, about reptilians, about chemtrails. The system has won, not even by silencing us. It has won by creating a world where truth and lies have the same weight, the same volume, and distinguishing between them has become almost impossible. Our knowledge, instead of becoming a weapon, becomes exotic, niche content for a small circle of initiates. And herein lies the main paradox and the main tragedy of our situation. We possess knowledge that could potentially change the course of human history, but we are utterly devoid of the power to make that knowledge have any effect. We can show you the red signature, but we cannot force the Secretary of Defense to comment on it. We can prove that the geometry of the attack rules out the anchor theory, but we cannot compel CNN or the BBC to dedicate even a single news segment to it. We exist in a parallel information reality. While the world continues to discuss the shadows on the cave wall, geopolitical squabbles, economic forecasts, we are trying to tell them that there is a real world outside the cave. But the inhabitants of the cave are comfortable in their twilight world. They do not want to hear about another. They do not want to know. Because knowledge is not only power, knowledge is responsibility. If you accept that the threat is real, you have to do something about it. Change your life. Demand action from your government. Prepare for the worst. It is far easier and more comfortable to dismiss us, call us crazy, and go back to watching another TV series. Blissful ignorance is the most powerful drug, and the system is its main dealer. And so we are left alone with this knowledge, and it begins to change us. The world around us remains the same, but our perception of it is altered forever. You can no longer look at the starry sky with peace. It used to be a symbol of eternity, beauty, romance. Now, staring into the darkness between the stars, you involuntarily search for a shadow. The shadow that glides silently through the void, watching us. You can no longer perceive news of global network outages or unexplained satellite failures as simple technical glitches. Every such event is now a potential signal, another act in the silent play we are witnessing. You begin to see patterns where you once saw only randomness. This knowledge creates a feeling of deep, existential loneliness. You walk down the street, see people laughing, hurrying about their business, immersed in their daily concerns, and you realize you live in a different world from them. They live in a world where the biggest threat is an economic crisis or a new pandemic. You live in a world where an invisible, inhuman sword of Damocles already hangs over the planet, and you cannot share this knowledge with them because they will not understand you. They will look at you like you are crazy. This is the burden of Cassandra, the burden of knowing and being unable to be heard. But this knowledge breeds not only despair, it also breeds responsibility. Now that we know, we cannot simply go back to our old lives. We become watchmen. We become those who have voluntarily taken up a post that no one created. We continue to watch. We continue to analyze. We continue to search for new pieces of the puzzle. Our community, scattered across the globe, becomes a kind of invisible college, a global observation network trying to compensate for the blindness and silence of official structures. We are monitoring the Hera mission. We are analyzing new data from magnetometers. We are sifting through archives for traces of past visits. We have become the eyes and ears of a humanity that has chosen to remain blind and deaf. And this imbues our isolated existence with a new, higher meaning. We may lose this information war. We may be silenced, discredited, ignored. But we cannot allow ourselves to stop trying. Because if we fall silent, who then will remain on watch? And it is here, at this point, that the most terrible and most important question is born. A question directed not to space and not to the system, but to ourselves. Now that we know, what do we do with this knowledge? Simply continue to collect evidence in our digital archives. Turn this into an intellectual game, a kind of hobby for a small circle of initiates. Or does this knowledge oblige us to do something more? Perhaps our task is not just to observe. Perhaps our task is to prepare. Not to repel an invasion, no. We are powerless against such technology. But for what might come after. For the moment when concealment becomes impossible. For the day when the truth bursts forth, and the world we knew collapses overnight. Perhaps our mission is to build arcs. Not physical ones, but informational ones. To preserve knowledge, technology, the grains of common sense that will be needed by those who survive the coming chaos. Perhaps we are not just watchmen. Perhaps we are keepers. Keepers of the flame of reason in the encroaching twilight. This thought is heavy, almost unbearable, but it also gives hope. The hope that our knowledge, however tragic, is not a curse, but a tool we have yet to learn how to use. We see the strings, we see the choreography, but the puppeteer remains in the shadows. And the most terrifying question is not, what happens next? But are we next on his stage? This question remains unanswered. And in this deafening silence, in this uncertainty, we must continue our watch. And so, the circle is complete. Our investigation, which began with a simple, almost banal glitch in the global network, has led us through labyrinths of concealment, through the cold voids of space, and through the dark corridors of human psychology. We began as simple observers and ended as bearers of tragic knowledge. We stand at the end of this story, but it is not the kind of end that brings clarity and peace. It is a finale that leaves behind more questions than answers, and an unsettling feeling that the curtain has fallen only on the first act of a much larger and incomprehensible play. Let us, one last time, gather all the threads of our narrative, not to put a period on it, but to draw a map of the new, strange reality in which we are now forced to live, to summarize what we have learned, and to understand what we will face next. We began with a dual event. On Earth, in the Red Sea, the key arteries of the internet are severed. In space, the interstellar object 3I Atlas makes its closest and most precise pass over this region. The system immediately offers us a convenient, simple, and entirely terrestrial explanation. Geopolitical sabotage, accidental anchor damage. The whole world accepts this version because it requires no effort. It doesn't break the familiar picture of the world. This is a trickster event in its perfect execution, a smokescreen hiding something far more important. But we refuse to believe in simple answers. We started digging, and the first crack in the monolith of the official version appeared on the ocean floor itself. The physical evidence, melting at the ends of the break, vitrification of the optical fiber, screamed that this was not mechanical damage. It was the result of extreme, focused energy. Then we hit the first wall of silence, the complete absence of acoustic data that should have confirmed the anchor theory. This silence was not accidental. It was artificial. It was the first proof of a cover-up. The breakthrough came thanks to the oracles, those lone seekers working on the fringes of official science. An independent oceanographic station provided us with a recording of an anomalous, high-frequency chirp, perfectly matching the timing of the outages and pointing to a source above the water. And the digital archaeologist Stephen Burns, digging through the junk calibration logs of satellite magnetometers, found the smoking gun, a powerful, ultra-short magnetic pulse, the red signature that came from the exact point in space where 3I Atlas was at that moment. This pulse tied all the events together. It became the physical proof that the attack was launched from orbit. Further investigation turned into drawing a map of the conspiracy. We saw that this was not an isolated incident, but the culmination of a long half-century chain of events that began with the WOW signal in 1977. We reconstructed the anatomy of 3I Atlas itself, proving that its properties, a stealth coating, a super strong hull, controlled flight, and finally, a trajectory change to an observation position near the Trojan asteroids, are incompatible with a natural origin. We realized that we were dealing with a high-tech, intelligently controlled probe. We asked the question, cui bono, and understood the motives of the system. Hiding the truth was a logical and inevitable step for them to prevent panic, maintain their monopoly on power, and perhaps to secretly attempt to copy an unattainable technology. We also considered the possible motives of the other side, from cold scientific reconnaissance and a warning shot to the terrifying preparation for a full-scale invasion in the dark forest paradigm. We saw that the technologies required for such an attack, directed energy weapons, orbital platforms, artificial intelligence, are no longer pure science fiction, but are at the forefront of our own terrestrial military development. This forced us to ask the most paranoid question. Was this all a test of our own secret weapon? Finally, we returned to the beginning and understood the full genius of the plan. The strike was delivered not with an exotic death ray, but with a focused EMP beam that perfectly mimicked the effects of terrestrial EW systems and blamed all side effects on the chaos of the conflict zone. And the cables were just the most obvious, but far from the only, victim. And this knowledge, complete and comprehensive, left us in the position of a digital Cassandra, knowing the truth, but unable to convey it to a world that prefers to remain in ignorance. And here we are, at the end of the road. What is the bottom line? We have a world that has secretly, imperceptibly to itself, already crossed the Rubicon. We can no longer speak with certainty about our solitude in the universe. The first contact we so eagerly awaited and feared may have already happened. But it did not go as we imagined. It was not a dialogue, but a cold, one-sided analysis. We were scanned, studied, and perhaps weighed. And we didn't even realize what was happening. We continue to live our ordinary lives while above us, at a Lagrange point, a silent observer now hangs. A sentinel whose intentions are unknown to us, and whose capabilities are frighteningly superior to ours. And this changes everything. It introduces a new, unknown variable into the equation of our future, one that could at any moment collapse all our plans, all our hopes, our entire civilization. The main question of our investigation, coincidence or choreography, has been answered. It was choreography. Flawless, cold, inhuman. But in answering this question, we have given birth to a new, far more important and terrifying one. If this was a prelude, what is it a prelude to? If this was the first strike, when and from where should we expect the second? We have no answers to these questions, and perhaps we won't until it's too late. Our investigation is complete, but our watch is not. It is just beginning. Now our common task, the task of the entire community of seekers, is to keep watching, to keep listening, to keep asking uncomfortable questions and not to trust simple answers. We must watch the Hera mission, because the small asteroid Dimorphos could become the next scene in this cosmic drama. We must monitor the state of the global network, the strange glitches, the anomalies in satellite operations. We must watch the silence of the system, because the deeper their silence, the more important what they are hiding is. We have transformed from passive spectators into active participants. We have become the immune system of humanity, small white blood cells trying to identify and flag a threat that the rest of the organism does not see. Perhaps there are too few of us. Perhaps we are powerless. But we exist. And as long as we continue to search, as long as we continue to doubt, as long as we continue to share knowledge with each other, hope remains. The hope that at the decisive moment, we will not be completely alone and completely blind. Our watch continues. Stay with us, and whatever happens, keep watching the stars. But now, with different eyes.